The mountain was supposed to be empty. Instead, it became a graveyard. 12 Navy SEALs trapped in a kill box, ammunition bleeding dry, radios screaming static, and an enemy force 3 times their size closing in for the slaughter. Captain Ethan Rourke pressed his back against frozen shale as bullets carved the air above his head, every instinct screaming that someone had sold them out. Then a single rifle shot cracked from somewhere impossibly high. An enemy commander's head snapped back. Another shot. Another body dropped. The entire battlefield went silent. Whoever was up there wasn't on any manifest, wasn't on any radio frequency, wasn't supposed to exist, but they were about to save or destroy everyone on that ridge. If you want to see how this impossible rescue unfolds, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The operation had smelled wrong from the beginning. Captain Ethan Rourke felt it the moment the Blackhawk's wheels left the deck of the carrier, that cold, metallic taste in the back of his throat that every combat veteran learns to recognize, but most learn to ignore. Instinct versus orders. Experience versus mission parameters. He'd been running operations in these mountains for 3 years, and the briefing he'd received 6 hours ago violated every pattern he'd learned to trust. Primary objective is a weapons cache, the intelligence officer had said, tapping a satellite image with 2 fingers. Remote location, minimal security, quick in, quick out. Minimal security. That phrase alone should have triggered alarms. Nothing in this part of the Hindu Kush was ever minimally secured. Not anymore. Not after the last 18 months of territorial shifts and shadow wars that never made it onto the evening news. But the mission had come down from higher up the chain than Rourke usually dealt with. The kind of altitude where questions weren't welcome and objections were career-ending. So he'd swallowed the metallic taste, checked his rifle, and loaded his team onto the helicopter. Now, 8 hours later, that instinct was screaming. The insertion had gone smooth, too smooth. The rally point was right where it should be, a cluster of wind-carved boulders beneath a ridge that looked like a broken spine against the pre-dawn sky. Temperature hovered just above freezing. Visibility was good. Wind was manageable. Every tactical checkbox marked green, except one. "Actual, this is point," came the whisper over the radio. Sergeant Marcus Chen, their forward scout, had the kind of voice that never changed pitch no matter how bad things got. "I've got movement. Multiple positions. This doesn't match the brief." Rourke keyed his mic twice, acknowledged, continue, and moved forward through the rocks with the fluid, controlled motion of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. His team fanned out behind him in a formation so practiced it was almost telepathic. 12 operators, the best he'd ever worked with, men who could read a battlefield like a book and write their own ending when the script went sideways. He reached Chen's position and dropped into a crouch beside him. "Show me," Rourke said. Chen handed over the spotting scope without a word. The weapons cache was there, exactly where intelligence had placed it, a cluster of low stone buildings tucked against the mountain's eastern face, partially hidden by an overhang that would defeat most satellite surveillance, but the minimal security was nowhere in sight. Instead, Rourke counted at least 40 hostile fighters in fighting positions that looked like they'd been prepared days ago. Sandbagged machine gun nests, interlocking fields of fire, mortar tubes positioned on high ground. This wasn't a storage facility. It was a fortified position. It was a trap. "Tell me I'm seeing this wrong," Chen said quietly. "You're not." Rourke lowered the scope, his jaw tight. "This is a setup." "Do we abort?" It was the right question, the tactically sound question, but Rourke was already running calculations in his head. They were 4 clicks from the extraction point, exposed on high ground, with dawn breaking in less than 30 minutes. If this position was bait, and someone knew they were coming, then the enemy probably had forces positioned along every likely exfil route. Aborting might just mean walking into a different kill box. Before he could answer, the radio crackled. "All stations be advised." It was Lieutenant Sarah Kim running overwatch from the western ridge. Her voice carried that same strange flatness Chen's had, the sound of a professional trying to keep panic out of the transmission. "I've got eyes on a large force moving up the southern approach. At least 60 personnel. They're not headed for the cache. They're headed for us. Rourke felt his stomach drop. Confirm 60? He said into the mic. Confirmed. Actual, we need to move. Now. Rourke glanced at Chen, then back at the cache below. The tactical picture was crystallizing with brutal clarity. The cache had never been the real target. They were. Someone had fed them poisoned intelligence, positioned them on high ground with no cover and limited egress, and was now closing the trap with overwhelming force. 60 plus 40. 100 hostiles against 12 operators with ammunition for a quick raid, not a sustained firefight. All stations, collapse on actual, Rourke ordered, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his veins. Fighting withdrawal to Rally Point Bravo. We are compromised. His team moved like water, flowing back through the rocks toward the fallback position with practiced speed. But Rally Point Bravo was a defensive position, not an escape route. It was a cluster of boulders and a shallow ravine that would give them cover and good firing lanes, but no way out if the enemy brought real numbers. They had maybe 3 minutes before contact. Rourke used 2 of them running through options in his head, each one worse than the last. The radio was crackling with fragmented traffic now. Too much interference, maybe jamming, maybe just the mountains eating the signal. He tried reaching the quick reaction force on standby at the forward operating base. Static. He tried the air support package that was supposed to be on call. Static. He tried the emergency frequency. Nothing but white noise and the sound of his own pulse in his ears. Comms are dead, said Staff Sergeant David Ortiz, the team's communications specialist. His face was tight with the kind of controlled fury that came from knowing someone had deliberately cut their lifeline. All frequencies. Someone's running a blanket jammer. Can you punch through? Not without time I don't have. Rourke nodded. He'd expected that answer. Everything about this situation screamed coordination, poisoned intel, pre-positioned forces, communications blackout. This wasn't an opportunistic ambush. This was a planned kill operation. The question was, planned by who? Positions, Rourke barked as the first gunfire echoed across the valley. His team dropped into cover with the smooth efficiency of men who'd done this too many times to count. Chen and 2 others took the high rocks on the left. Kim and her element anchored the right flank. Ortiz stayed central with Rourke, trying to coax anything useful out of the dead radio. The enemy came up the southern approach exactly as Kim had called it. 60 fighters moving with surprising discipline for what was supposed to be a ragtag militia. They had uniforms, real equipment, tactics that suggested actual training. These aren't locals, Chen said over the radio, tracking targets through his scope. These guys move like professionals. Noted, Rourke said. Hold fire until they're in the kill zone. The enemy force advanced in a textbook flanking maneuver, spreading wide to prevent concentrated fire, using cover properly, moving in bounds. Rourke watched them come and felt that metallic taste turn to ash in his mouth. Whoever had set this trap hadn't just sold out the mission. They'd sold out his team to people who knew how to kill American operators. The lead elements reached the kill zone. Fire, Rourke said quietly. The valley erupted. 12 rifles opened up with surgical precision, each operator picking targets and dropping them with the cold efficiency that came from years of training and combat experience. The enemy's advance shattered. Bodies dropped. Screams echoed off the rocks. For maybe 10 seconds, it looked like 12 was enough. Then the machine guns opened up. Heavy fire raked across the boulder field, forcing Rourke's team deeper into cover. Rounds sparked off stone and whined through the air with that distinctive crack that meant they were close, too close. Ortiz grunted as a fragment of shattered rock caught him across the cheek, drawing blood. Contact left, Kim shouted. Second force moving up the western approach. Rourke's head snapped around. The 40 fighters from the cache. They'd been held in reserve, and now they were flanking from the opposite side, turning the defensive position into a pincer. Shift fire, Rourke ordered. Don't let them link up. But it was already too late. The tactical situation was collapsing with terrible speed. 100 hostiles against 12, attacking from 2 directions with no communications and no support. Rourke did the math in his head and came up with the same answer every time. They were going to die here. How's that radio, he shouted at Ortiz. Still dead. A mortar round whistled overhead and detonated 50 meters behind their position, showering them with dirt and rock fragments. The enemy was ranging them. The next one would be closer. Rourke made a decision. Chen, Kim, grab 3 shooters each and hold the flanks. Everyone else, with me. We're breaking through the southern element. That's 60 hostiles, sir, Chen said. I can count, Sergeant. But it's the only way out that doesn't end with us surrounded on 3 sides. It was a desperate plan. The kind of plan that got written about in after-action reports with words like audacious and aggressive when it worked, and words like reckless and tragic when it didn't. But staying in place meant dying in place, and Ethan Rourke hadn't survived 3 years in these mountains by accepting death when he could still choose violence. On my mark, he said, his voice cutting through the gunfire with absolute clarity. 3, 2, 1. The word mark never left his mouth, because that's when the first impossible shot cracked across the valley. 800 meters upslope, in a position no one had scouted and no one had cleared, a single rifle shot echoed like thunder off the mountain walls. In the valley below, the enemy commander, a tall man with an RPG on his shoulder, shouting orders, dropped like a puppet with cut strings. His head snapped back. The RPG tumbled from his hands. He was dead before his knees hit the dirt. The entire battlefield went silent. Rourke's team froze. The enemy force froze. For one surreal moment, 100 armed men stopped trying to kill each other and simply stared at the corpse of their commander, trying to process what had just happened. Then a second shot rang out. Another enemy fighter dropped. This one a machine gunner who'd been pouring fire into Kim's position. The bullet took him in the chest from an angle that shouldn't have been possible, and the gun went silent. A third shot. A fourth. A fifth. Each one came from a different direction, or at least sounded like it did. Each one dropped a key target, leaders, heavy weapons operators, spotters with radios. The enemy force started to fracture, fighters diving for cover, shouting in confusion, trying to identify where the shots were coming from, but the mountain gave them no answers. "What the hell is that?" Ortiz whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Rourke didn't answer. He was too busy watching the enemy formation dissolve into chaos as an invisible shooter systematically dismantled their command structure. This wasn't suppressing fire. This wasn't a drone strike. This was one person, one impossibly skilled person, turning the tide of an entire battle from somewhere high above the kill zone. The shots kept coming, methodical, precise, ruthless. An officer trying to rally his men took a bullet through the throat. A mortar team scrambling to adjust their fire lost their gunner to a shot that must have traveled 900 meters. A radio operator got halfway through a transmission before the side of his head exploded in a red mist. Kim's voice crackled over the radio, tight with disbelief. "Actual, are you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," Rourke said. "I just don't believe it." Chen's voice cut in. "Whoever that is, they just bought us time. What's the play?" Rourke's mind was racing. The enemy force was in disarray, but they weren't broken. Not yet. They still had overwhelming numbers, they still had position, and whoever was up there shooting couldn't maintain this rate of fire forever. Eventually, they'd run out of ammunition, or targets would get smart and stay in hard cover, or... Another shot cracked out. This one dropped a man carrying what looked like a radio jammer on his back. The device sparked and died. Ortiz's radio suddenly burst to life with clear signal. "Say again. Ghostwalker is not on station. Mission is not authorized. What is your..." Rourke grabbed the handset. "Broken arrow. Broken arrow. Grid." He rattled off their position with mechanical precision while his eyes stayed locked on the battlefield below. 12 personnel sustaining contact with forces strength 100+, request immediate air support, and QRF. How copy? The voice on the other end went silent for a beat too long. Copy your position, but we show no mission in that sector. Confirm you are... We are getting shot at by 100 hostiles who knew exactly where we'd be, Rourke snarled into the radio. "I don't care what your board shows. We need air support now." "Stand by." The radio went quiet. Rourke wanted to scream, "Stand by," the universal military phrase for, "We're going to let you die while we figure out what's happening." But the mysterious shooter wasn't standing by. Another shot. Another body. The enemy force was starting to break. Not retreat, not yet, but the cohesion was gone. Small groups were pulling back to hard cover. Others were trying to flank wide, get out of the kill zone, find an angle on whoever was slaughtering them from above. That's when Rourke realized the truth with ice-cold clarity. The shooter had saved them, had bought them time, had shattered the enemy's command structure and stopped the pincer movement cold. But now the enemy was adapting, and they were starting to climb. "They're going after the sniper," Chen said, his voice flat with understanding. Rourke watched through his scope as at least 20 fighters broke off from the main assault and started scrambling up the steep slope toward the high ground where the shots had originated. They moved fast, angry, determined to kill whoever had been killing them. And whoever was up there was alone. "Sir?" Kim's voice carried a question she didn't want to ask. "Do we pull back while they're distracted?" It was the tactically sound choice. Use the chaos to break contact, get to the extraction point, get out alive. Their mystery guardian had given them a gift. The smart play was to take it. Rourke looked up at the mountain. Somewhere up there, hidden in rocks and wind and shadow, was a person who had just saved 12 lives without hesitation. A person who had broken God knows what rules or protocols to pull them out of a kill box. A person who was about to be overrun by 20 hostile fighters with blood in their eyes. "How fast can we climb?" Rourke asked. Chen turned to look at him. "Sir? That shooter just saved our lives. I'm not leaving them to die alone." "We don't even know who they are," Ortiz said. "I don't care." Rourke's voice carried the kind of finality that ended all arguments. "Chen, Kim, take 4 shooters and hold this position. Keep the main force pinned. Everyone else with me. We're going up." "That's a vertical climb under fire," Kim said. "It's suicide." "So was staying in the kill box. Move!" He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Rourke was already moving, scrambling up the loose scree slope with his rifle across his chest and his boots slipping on stone that hadn't been meant for climbing. Behind him, 5 operators followed without hesitation. Not because the plan was good, but because Rourke had never left a teammate behind, and whoever was up there shooting had just become a teammate, whether they knew it or not. The slope was brutal. 60-degree angle in places, loose rock that slid away underfoot, no cover from the sporadic fire that still cracked across the valley below. Rourke's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he kept climbing, pulling himself up by handholds that crumbled in his grip, driven by a fury that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with the kind of debt that couldn't be measured in after-action reports. Halfway up, he heard the shooting change. The precise, methodical cracks from above became faster, more desperate. The mystery shooter was engaging targets closer than before, much closer. The enemy climbing team had reached their position. Rourke pushed harder. A bullet sparked off the rock near his head. Enemy fire from below. Someone who'd spotted the climbing team. He didn't even slow down. Just kept moving, kept climbing, kept driving toward the sound of gunfire that was getting louder and more chaotic with every second. Then he heard something that made his blood freeze. The click of an empty chamber. The shooter was out of ammunition. Rourke hauled himself over a ledge and into a narrow cleft in the rock, his rifle coming up even as his eyes adjusted to the shadows. The cleft opened into a small natural hide, the kind of position a skilled operator could occupy for days without being detected. Gear was scattered across the space, empty magazines, spotting equipment, and in the center of it all, still wearing a ghillie suit that made her almost invisible against the stone. A woman. She was younger than Rourke had expected, maybe 30, lean and hard in the way that came from years of field work, not gym training. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint and something that might have been blood. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, cold, sharp, utterly calm despite the fact that she was currently field stripping a jammed rifle with hands that moved too fast to follow. She didn't even look up when Rourke crashed into the hide. 3 tangos coming up the left side, she said, her voice carrying a Midwest flatness that belonged in a briefing room, not a firefight. 2 more on the right. I'm empty. You're not. Start shooting. Rourke stared at her for half a second. This impossible woman who had just saved his entire team and was now calmly issuing orders like she ran the operation, then spun and dropped into a firing position. The first hostile came over the ledge with an AK-47 raised in murder in his eyes. Rourke shot him twice in the chest. The second and third came together, trying to flank. Rourke's team had arrived now, pouring into the hide with weapons up, and they cut both fighters down before they could get a shot off. "Right side!" the woman barked. Rourke swung his rifle right, just as two more hostiles appeared on a different approach. He dropped the first. Ortiz got the second. Then the shooting stopped. Silence fell over the hide like a held breath. Rourke's ears rang, his heart hammered. Adrenaline sang through his veins like electricity. But no more targets appeared. The enemy climbing team was dead or broken, and the valley below had gone strangely quiet. He turned to look at the woman. She had finished clearing her rifle's malfunction and was now reloading with a magazine she'd pulled from somewhere in the ghillie suit. Her movements were mechanical, professional. But Rourke could see the tremor in her hands now. The exhaustion, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd just burned through every round they had and was running on fumes. "Who are you?" Rourke asked. She didn't answer immediately, just seated the magazine with a sharp click, charged the rifle, and finally met his eyes. "Someone who wasn't supposed to be here," she said quietly. "Someone who just ended her career to save yours. And someone who's about to have a lot of very angry people asking the same question you just did." "I don't—" "Radio check," she interrupted, her tone shifting to pure business. "You have comms?" "Spotty," Ortiz said. "Got through to base right before we climbed, but then we need to move. Now. The main force is regrouping, and they're going to hit this position hard once they realize I'm empty." She was right. Rourke could hear it in the valley below. Shouted commands, the sound of many boots on stone, the distinctive clatter of weapons being readied. The enemy had taken a beating, but they weren't done. Not by a long shot. "There's a route," the woman continued, already moving toward the back of the hide. "Ravine system about 200 meters northeast. It's narrow, defensible, and it leads to an old shepherd track that'll get you down the backside of the mountain. If we move fast, we can stay ahead of them." "How do you know all this?" Rourke demanded. She paused at the edge of the hide and looked back at him with those winter sky eyes. "Because I've been watching this mountain for 3 months," she said, "and because someone needed to make sure operations like yours didn't walk into traps. I just never thought I'd have to pull the trigger myself." Then she was moving, slipping through the rocks with the fluid grace of someone who knew every stone by heart. Rourke looked at his team. They looked back at him with expressions that ranged from confusion to disbelief to the kind of dark humor that kept operators sane in situations that should have killed them. "Well," Ortiz said quietly, "this day just keeps getting weirder." "Move," Rourke ordered. "Questions later. Survival now." They followed the woman into the mountain as gunfire erupted behind them, and the enemy's surge finally broke against the empty hide they'd just abandoned. The ravine she'd mentioned was exactly where she'd said it would be. A twisted cut through stone, barely wide enough for one person at a time, with walls that rose high enough to block most angles of fire. It was a death trap if they got caught inside. It was also their only chance. "Single file," the woman called back. "Watch for loose rock. The walls narrow in places. If you panic, you die." No one panicked. They moved through the ravine like ghosts, weapons up, eyes scanning, every sense screaming that they were being funneled into a kill zone. But the woman led them through with absolute confidence, calling out turns before they appeared, warning about unstable ground, guiding them deeper into the mountain's guts. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed off stone walls. The enemy was coming. And the ravine was about to become exactly what Rourke had feared, a tomb carved from living rock with no way out and nowhere to run. The woman stopped at a narrow choke point and turned to face him. "This is where we make our stand," she said. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, the voice of someone who had already accepted that this might be where the story ended. "The ravine gets narrower ahead. They'll have to come at us one or two at a time. If we hold here, we might survive long enough for your air support to arrive." "And if it doesn't?" Rourke asked. She smiled. It was a terrible smile, the kind that had no humor in it at all. "Then I hope you made peace with whatever god you pray to, Captain, because we're about to find out if 12 bullets can stop 100 men." Rourke looked at her, this stranger who had saved them, who had sacrificed everything for people she'd never met, who was now preparing to die alongside them in a nameless ravine on a nameless mountain in a war that didn't officially exist. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. For the first time since he'd met her, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Something like regret. Something like relief. "Mara," she said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Mara Voss. And I really hope I get to tell you the rest of that story before we all die here." Then the enemy rounded the corner and the ravine exploded into violence. The first hostile came through the choke point fast and low, his AK-47 already spitting fire before his boots found solid ground. Mara dropped him with a single shot to the center mass, her rifle barking once in the confined space before the body even hit stone. The sound was deafening. The muzzle flash lit up the ravine like a strobe, casting twisted shadows on walls that seemed to close in tighter with every second. "Contact front," Rourke shouted, though everyone already knew. Already had their weapons up. Already understood that this narrow slash through the mountain was about to become a meat grinder. Two more fighters poured through the gap, trying to use their dead comrade's body as cover. Chen took the one on the left with a controlled burst. Ortiz got the right. Both bodies crumpled, creating a growing pile of corpses that would either slow the next wave or give them something to hide behind. Mara's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "They're going to stack the entrance and rush. When they do, throw everything you have at the gap. Make them afraid of this space." "How many rounds you got left?" Rourke asked, his eyes never leaving the choke point. "Enough to make them regret coming after me." It wasn't an answer, but Rourke didn't push. He could hear it now, the sound of many boots scrambling over rock, shouts in a language he didn't speak but understood perfectly. The enemy was massing for a push. They had the numbers. They had the momentum. All they needed was the courage to charge into a space where their numerical advantage meant nothing. Someone on the other side started shouting orders. "Here they come," Mara said quietly. The enemy surged through the gap like water through a broken dam. 6 fighters, then 8, then 10, all trying to overwhelm the narrow passage with sheer violence. They fired as they came, wild spray and pray that ricocheted off stone and filled the air with fragments and lead. Rourke's team opened up with disciplined, overlapping fire. The ravine became hell. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness. The sound was a physical thing, a pressure wave that hammered eardrums and made thought impossible. Men screamed and died and fell over each other in a tangle of limbs and weapons. The smell of cordite mixed with blood and the sharp mineral scent of pulverized rock. Mara worked her rifle like a machine built for one purpose, each shot placed with brutal economy. Headshots when she had the angle, center mass when she didn't, never wasting ammunition, never hesitating. Rourke found himself watching her between targets, trying to understand what he was seeing. This wasn't just training, this was something deeper, something that came from a place where hesitation meant death, and death was just another tactical consideration. The enemy charge broke. Bodies clogged the choke point now, 3 deep in places, creating a barrier of their own dead that no amount of courage could push through. The survivors fell back, dragging wounded with them, leaving behind weapons and equipment, and the kind of silence that only comes after extreme violence. Rourke's team held their positions, weapons trained on the gap, fingers on triggers, waiting for the next push that would inevitably come. It didn't. Instead, they heard something worse. Shouting, commands, and the distinctive sound of equipment being moved into position. "They're setting up a support weapon," Mara said, her voice tight. "Probably a heavy machine gun. They're going to pour fire through that gap until we're all dead or out of ammunition." "How long do we have?" Rourke asked. 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes if they're cautious. Can we fall back deeper into the ravine?" "No." She shook her head, eyes still locked on the choke point. 30 meters ahead, the walls close completely. Dead end. This is the only defensible position between here and the Shepherd track, and we'll never reach the track if they get a gun set up behind us. Rourke processed that in the space of a heartbeat. They were trapped. The enemy knew it. And in less than 2 minutes, they'd start shredding the team with belt-fed automatic fire that would turn this narrow space into a killing corridor. He looked at Mara. Really looked at her for the first time since the shooting had started. Her ghillie suit was torn in places, showing the tactical gear underneath. Non-standard equipment, black on black, no unit patches or identification of any kind. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion, the 1,000-yard stare, the muscle memory of someone who'd been living in the field too long. But her hands were steady, Her breathing was controlled, and her eyes held something Rourke recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. The look of someone who'd already died once and wasn't afraid to do it again. "You said you've been watching this mountain for 3 months," Rourke said quietly. "That means you know things, positions, routes, weaknesses." "I know everything," Mara replied without arrogance. "Just fact." "That's the job." "Then you know a way out of this." She was silent for a long moment. The sound of enemy preparations echoed through the gap, metal on stone, shouted coordinates, the mechanical clatter of a weapon being assembled. "There's one option," she said finally, "but it requires someone who can climb, who can move silent, and who's willing to die if it goes wrong." "Tell me." Mara pointed up at the ravine walls. They rose almost vertical here, 30 feet of sheer rock face with minimal handholds. But near the top, barely visible in the fading light, was a narrow ledge that ran parallel to the choke point. "That ledge connects to a fold in the rock," she explained, her voice low and fast. "Follow it 50 meters and you can drop down behind their position. You'd be above them, behind them. They wouldn't see you coming until it was too late. But one person against 20+ hostiles? One person with the element of surprise against 20 hostiles who are all looking the wrong direction." She met his eyes. "It's not a good plan, but it's the only plan that doesn't end with all of us dead in this hole." Rourke looked at the wall, at the ledge, at the drop that would kill anyone who fell. Then he looked at his team. Good men, tired men, men who'd followed him into hell because they trusted his judgment, even when that judgment had been built on poisoned intelligence. "I'll go," he said. "No." Mara's voice carried absolute finality. "You're the team leader. They need you here to coordinate the defense. I'm going." "You're already exhausted. You've been shooting for—" "I've been on this mountain for 3 months, Captain. I know every rock, every shadow, every angle. You don't." She was already moving toward the wall, checking her rifle, her movements sharp and efficient despite the fatigue. "Besides, this is my fault." That stopped Rourke cold. "What?" "I was supposed to observe and report, that's all. Just watch, just document." Her voice carried something raw now, something that had been buried under professionalism and tactical necessity. "But I saw your team walking into a trap, and I couldn't—" She cut herself off, jaw tight. "I broke protocol. I compromised my mission. And now you're all stuck in this ravine because I decided to play hero instead of doing my job. You saved our lives. I delayed your deaths. There's a difference." She turned to face him fully, and for the first time Rourke saw past the operator to the person underneath. Someone haunted, someone carrying weight that had nothing to do with equipment. "I won't make that mistake again. I'm going up that wall, I'm flanking their position, and I'm giving you a chance to get out of here alive. That's how this ends. You're not going alone." "Yes, I am." "Sergeant Voss mupped. I'm not one of your operators, Captain." "You don't give me orders." Her voice was steel wrapped in ice. "I'm a ghost. I don't exist. And after today, I'll exist even less. So let me do what ghosts do best." She started climbing before he could argue. The wall should have been impossible. 30 feet of near vertical rock with handholds that barely existed and no safety equipment. But Mara went up it like gravity was a suggestion, her fingers finding cracks Rourke couldn't even see, her boots somehow gripping stone that looked smooth as glass. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd spent years learning to become part of the terrain. Halfway up, she paused. "Captain," she called down, her voice barely audible over the sound of enemy preparations. "When the shooting starts, you push hard through that choke point. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just move. Understood?" "Understood." She nodded once, then continued climbing. Rourke watched until she disappeared over the ledge, then turned to his team. They were watching him with expressions that ranged from respect to concern to the dark humor that was the only defense against situations that should break a person's mind. "Well," Ortiz said quietly, "she's either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest." "Both," Chen said. "Definitely both." "Positions," Rourke ordered, pushing down the knot of anxiety that had formed in his chest. "When she makes her move, we go through that gap fast and hard. Overwhelm whatever's left on the other side. Questions? There were none. Professional soldiers didn't question suicide tactics when suicide tactics were the only tactics left. The wait was torture. Rourke counted seconds in his head, trying to track Mara's progress along the invisible ledge. 50 meters, she'd said. At a tactical pace, moving silent. That was maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 3 if the footing was bad. Every second felt like an hour. Every sound from the enemy position made his trigger finger twitch. The machine gun fired a test burst. The sound was massive, a chattering roar that echoed through the ravine like the voice of an angry deity. Tracers sparked off the walls near the choke point, bright lines in the growing darkness. The enemy was dialed in. They'd dump belt after belt through that gap until everything inside was shredded meat. 30 seconds. Someone on the enemy side shouted in English. Psychological warfare, making them count down to their own deaths. Then we turn you all into paste. Rourke's radio crackled. Ortiz had been working it during the lull, trying to punch through the interference, trying to reach anyone who could send air support or a rescue package or anything. Ghostwalker actual, this is Broken Arrow, Ortiz transmitted for the dozenth time. We are danger close with hostile forces, grid. Static answered him, always static. Rourke had stopped hoping for rescue. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. The only way out of this ravine was through it, over the bodies of everyone trying to kill them, or not at all. 20 seconds. Rourke's grip tightened on his rifle. 10. He drew a breath that tasted like blood and stone. 5. Then the world exploded, but not from the choke point. The explosion came from above and behind the enemy position, a concussive blast that shook the entire ravine and sent debris raining down like hail. Someone screamed, orders dissolved into chaos. And through it all, Rourke heard the distinctive crack, crack, crack of Mara's rifle, firing from an elevated position with clear lines of sight on targets who'd never expected to be flanked. Go! Rourke roared. Move, move, move! His team surged through the choke point like a battering ram, weapons up, firing on the move, driven by momentum and desperation and the certain knowledge that hesitation meant death. They burst out of this narrow passage into a wider section of the ravine where the enemy had been setting up their killing ground. It was carnage. Bodies lay scattered across the rocks, some from Mara's rifle, others from whatever explosive she'd used to announce her presence. The machine gun sat abandoned, its crew dead or fleeing. Fighters were scrambling for cover, trying to process the fact that they were suddenly the ones being hunted. Mara stood on a ledge 15 feet above the chaos, silhouetted against the darkening sky, her rifle tracking and firing with mechanical precision. She looked like something out of mythology. A Valkyrie, a death spirit, a ghost made flesh for the sole purpose of dispensing violence. Rourke's team hit the disorganized enemy force like a sledgehammer. They moved in a practiced formation, each operator covering sectors, calling targets, dropping hostiles with the ruthless efficiency of men who'd done this too many times to count. The fight was brief and brutal. The enemy had numbers, but they'd lost cohesion, lost leadership, lost the initiative. They broke. The survivors fled deeper into the ravine system, abandoning weapons and wounded in their desperation to get away from the nightmare that had been supposed to be an easy kill. Silence fell across the stone like a curtain. Rourke's team held their positions, weapons scanning for threats, fingers still on triggers, minds still running on combat autopilot. But no more targets appeared. The enemy was gone, scattered, broken. They'd won. Mara dropped down from the ledge with a controlled fall that should have shattered her ankles but didn't. She landed in a crouch, rose smoothly, and walked toward Rourke with her rifle held low but ready. Her face was expressionless. Her movements were mechanical. She looked like someone operating on pure adrenaline and training, with nothing left in the tank but the muscle memory of how to keep moving. The shepherd track is 200 meters that direction, she said, pointing deeper into the ravine without preamble. It's steep, but it's clear. You can be off this mountain in 20 minutes if you move fast. What about you? Rourke asked. She didn't answer immediately, just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes distant. Then she seemed to come back into herself, focused on his face. I'm not coming with you. Like hell you're not. Captain, you don't understand what I am, what I've done. Her voice was flat, dead. I was part of a program that doesn't exist, operating under orders that were never written, watching targets that were never designated. I had one rule: never interfere, never let anyone know I was there. And I broke that rule to save you. So what? So the moment I pulled that trigger, I stopped being an asset and became a liability. My handlers won't extract me. They'll erase me, and anyone I'm with when they come looking. She met his eyes. I just saved your life, Captain. Don't make me responsible for ending it. Rourke stared at her. At this woman who'd appeared out of nowhere, slaughtered her way through an army to protect strangers, and was now calmly explaining why she had to disappear back into the shadows. That's not how this works, he said. That's exactly how this works. I don't leave people behind. I'm not people. I'm a ghost. She turned away, scanning the ravine with eyes that never stopped moving, never stopped processing threats. You need to go, now, before they regroup. And you? I'll disappear. I'm good at it. Rourke's radio crackled to life. Repeat, Ghost Walker. Actual, we have your position. QRF is inbound. ETA, 12 minutes. Finally. Air support, rescue. The cavalry arriving just late enough to be useless, but just early enough to save them from having to walk off a mountain in the dark. Mara heard it too. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, tightened. That's your ride, she said. Take it. Come with us. I can't. Why not? She turned back to face him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marvos let the mask slip. Let him see the exhaustion, the guilt, the weight of whatever she'd done or seen or been ordered to do in service to a program that didn't officially exist. Because the last time I put my team before the mission, people died, she said quietly. Good people. Better than me. And I swore I'd never make that mistake again. What happened? I was running Overwatch on an operation in Kandahar. My spotter, his name was Danny Torres, saw movement in a compound we'd already cleared. He wanted to call it in. I told him to wait, to confirm, to follow protocol. Her voice was flat, mechanical, reciting facts like a mission report. 30 seconds later, the compound exploded. IED that should have been detected. Wasn't. Danny was killed in the blast. 3 other operators were wounded. All because I followed the rules instead of trusting his instincts. She paused, jaw tight. After that, they pulled me out of conventional operations. Put me into the program. Told me I'd be more useful as a watcher, someone who gathered intelligence without leaving fingerprints, someone who could see everything and do nothing. A bitter smile. Turns out I'm not very good at doing nothing. Rourke processed that in silence. He'd lost men too. Made calls that went wrong, carried names on his soul that would never wash clean. Every operator who'd been in the field long enough had similar stories. The only difference was whether you let those stories define you or destroy you. Torres was your spotter, Rourke said, which means he knew the risks, made his own choices. And I guarantee you that if he were here right now, he'd tell you to get on that helicopter. You don't know that. I know that no one who's ever worn the uniform would want their death to be the reason someone else stopped living. Mara's eyes went distant again, processing, calculating. Running through scenarios in a mind that had been trained to see 3 moves ahead and plan for every contingency. The radio crackled again. Ghostwalker Actual, we have visual on your position. Landing zone is hot. We need immediate smoke for extraction. Ortiz pulled a smoke grenade from his vest, looked at Rourke for confirmation. Rourke nodded. Ortiz popped the grenade and tossed it into an open area 20 meters away. Purple smoke billowed into the darkening sky. The sound of rotors echoed through the valley. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the ridgeline, flying low and fast, their door gunners already scanning for threats. Beautiful. Professional. The most welcome sight Rourke had seen in hours. They had maybe 90 seconds before the birds landed. Rourke turned back to Mara. She was already moving away from the group, slipping back toward the shadows at the edge of the ravine, disappearing, becoming what she claimed to be, a ghost. Sergeant Voss, Rourke called after her. She stopped but didn't turn around. When this is over, Rourke said, his voice carrying over the rotor wash, When the debrief is done and the paperwork is filed and someone asks me how 12 operators survived an ambush by 100 hostiles, I'm telling them the truth. Now she turned. Don't. I'm telling them that a lone operator with more courage than sense broke every rule in the book to save lives that weren't her responsibility, and I'm going to make sure that operator gets recognized instead of erased. You'll destroy your own career. I'll sleep better. They locked eyes across the distance. Two professionals. Two people who'd seen too much and carried too much, and were tired of pretending that doing the right thing always aligned with doing the ordered thing. The Blackhawks touched down, rotors still turning, crew chiefs already waving for the team to board. Rourke's team moved toward the birds in a tactical file, weapons out, covering each other. But Rourke stayed where he was, eyes on Mara, waiting for her decision. She stood at the edge of the purple smoke, half hidden in shadow, her ghillie suit making her almost invisible against the stone. A ghost caught between worlds, between who she'd been ordered to be and who she actually was. Then she made a choice. Mara Voss walked toward the helicopter, not running, not rushing, just walking with the controlled stride of someone who'd decided that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was trust another person. She climbed aboard the Black Hawk just as the first rounds from a regrouped enemy force started snapping through the air. The door gunner opened up with the minigun, laying down suppressing fire, while the pilot pulled pitch and lifted off. The valley dropped away beneath them. The mountain shrank. The battlefield that had nearly become their grave became just another set of coordinates on a map. Rourke sat across from Mara in the vibrating belly of the aircraft. She'd removed her ghillie suit, revealing tactical gear that was worn but well-maintained, weapons that showed the kind of care that came from people who understood that equipment failures meant death. She looked smaller without the suit, more human, more vulnerable. "You're going to regret this," she said over the rotor noise. "Probably," Rourke agreed, "but I've regretted a lot of things. At least this time I'll regret doing the right thing instead of the easy thing. They'll come for me. The program, they don't let people walk away. Then they'll have to go through me first." Mara smiled. It was a tired smile, a broken smile, but it was real. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Captain." "I've been called both." The Black Hawk banked hard, turning away from the mountain and toward the forward operating base 30 kilometers distant. Below them, the Hindu Kush stretched out in endless peaks and valleys, a landscape that had swallowed armies and broken empires and didn't care about the small human dramas playing out in its shadow. Chen leaned over from his position near the door. "Sir," he shouted over the noise, "we're getting a priority transmission. Command wants to know what happened up there." "Tell them we walked into an ambush," Rourke said, "and we survived because someone was watching our backs. That's all? That's all they need to know right now." Chen nodded and turned back to the radio, already crafting the kind of carefully worded report that would satisfy immediate questions without revealing anything that mattered. Ortiz caught Rourke's eye and jerked his chin toward Mara. "We're keeping her?" he asked quietly. "We're keeping her." "Good. I like her. She's terrifying. The best ones usually are." The flight took 18 minutes. 18 minutes of relative silence broken only by rotor noise and the occasional radio check. 18 minutes for the adrenaline to fade and the reality of what they'd just survived to settle into bones and muscles and minds. Rourke used the time to watch Mara. She sat with her rifle across her lap, her eyes distant, her face unreadable. But her hands were shaking now. The fine tremor that came after extreme stress, when the body finally had permission to acknowledge how close it had come to death. She caught him looking. "I'm fine," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "You don't have to be fine. Not right now. I've been fine for 3 months. I can manage 18 minutes. But her voice cracked on the last word, and Rourke saw something in her eyes that had nothing to do with tactical operations or mission parameters or the cold calculus of violence. He saw someone who'd been alone too long. The Black Hawk touched down at the FOB in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. The team disembarked quickly, muscle memory taking over, moving toward the debriefing area with the mechanical efficiency of operators who'd done this dance 1,000 times. But before Mara could follow, a hand grabbed her arm. She spun, instincts taking over, her other hand already moving toward the knife on her belt. Rourke released her immediately, hands up in a placating gesture. Easy, he said. Just wanted to say thank you before the paperwork and the questions and all the politics that's about to rain down on both of us. Mara relaxed fractionally. You don't need to thank me. Yeah, I do. You saved my team, saved my life. And you did it knowing exactly what it would cost you. He paused. That's not nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. This officer she'd met hours ago and would probably never serve with again. This man who'd climbed a mountain under fire because he refused to let her die alone. I had to, she said quietly. I watched you walk into that ambush. I saw the trap close. And I remembered Danny. I remembered what it felt like to do nothing while good people died. Her jaw tightened. I couldn't live through that twice. So you threw away your career to save strangers. I threw away a career I didn't want anymore to save people who deserved to go home. She smiled that broken smile again. There's a difference. Rourke wanted to say something profound, something that would adequately capture the debt he owed this woman, the respect he felt, the certainty that the world needed more people like her and fewer people like whoever had set that ambush. Instead, he just extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Sergeant Voss. She stared at his hand like it might bite her. I'm not on your team. Not officially, not yet. But you will be. Rourke's voice carried absolute certainty. Because I'm going to make sure of it, and because I think you're tired of being alone. Mara's eyes went wet, just for a second, before she blinked it away and buried it under professionalism and training and all the armor people built to survive jobs that should break them. She took his hand. Her grip was strong, steady. The grip of someone who'd decided to stop running from the past and start fighting for a future. This is a mistake, she said. Probably. They'll come for me. Let them try. You're insane. So I've been told. They stood there in the dust and noise of the FOB, two operators who'd survived something that should have killed them, shaking hands like it was a business transaction instead of a lifeline thrown across the darkness. Then the debriefing officer appeared, clipboard in hand, expression already forming the questions that would turn the next 12 hours into a bureaucratic nightmare. But that was a problem for later. Right now, Mara Voss was still breathing, still standing, still choosing to trust that maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous thing she could do was let someone else carry part of the weight. And Ethan Rourke was choosing to believe that saving one person was worth burning down whatever political bridges it took to make it happen. Behind them, the mountain disappeared into the night, its secrets intact, its violence forgotten by everyone except the people who'd bled on its stones and survived to tell about it. The first wave hit like a hammer. 3 fighters came around the corner firing on full automatic, their muzzle flashes strobing in the narrow space like lightning trapped in a bottle. Rourke dropped the lead man with 2 rounds center mass. Ortiz took the second. The third got halfway through bringing his weapon to bear before Mara put a bullet through his collarbone from an angle that shouldn't have existed. She'd somehow wedged herself into a crack in the ravine wall 8 feet up, turning herself into a human gun turret with perfect enfilade on the approach. The bodies fell in a tangle of limbs and weapons, blocking the narrow passage. That'll slow them, Mara called down, already repositioning. For about 30 seconds. She was right. The enemy adapted fast. They started using the corpses as cover, firing around them, trying to suppress the choke point with volume rather than accuracy. Bullets sparked off stone and whined through the air. Rock fragments peppered Rourke's face. The noise was deafening in the confined space, every shot magnified and reflected until the ravine itself seemed to be screaming. "Frag out!" someone shouted from behind the enemy position. Rourke saw the grenade bounce into view, a small dark sphere tumbling end over end down the ravine toward them. Time compressed. His body moved before his brain finished processing. He dove forward, scooped the grenade with one hand like he was fielding a ground ball, and hurled it back the way it had come in one continuous motion. The grenade disappeared around the corner. Someone screamed. The explosion came a heartbeat later, a deep crump that shook dust from the ravine walls and was followed by the wet sounds of shrapnel finding flesh. Silence fell for exactly 3 seconds. Then the enemy came again, and this time they were angry. They pushed hard, trying to overwhelm the position through sheer aggression. Bodies piled up in the killing zone. The air turned thick with gun smoke and copper. Rourke's team fired with mechanical precision, but the ammunition count was dropping fast and everyone could feel it. Magazines getting lighter, reload pouches emptying, the math getting worse with every trigger pull. Mara dropped from her perch and landed beside Rourke in a crouch, her rifle coming up smoothly. "They're going to try to flank," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with eerie calm. "There's a side passage about 40 meters back. It's a hard climb, but it's doable. We need to cover it, or they'll come at us from above." "Show me." She pointed to a shadow in the ravine wall that Rourke had dismissed as just another crack in the stone. But as he looked closer, he could see it, a narrow cleft that angled upward, barely wide enough for a human body. "Chen," Rourke barked, "take 2 shooters and cover that side passage. Nothing comes through." "On it!" Chen moved with 2 operators, disappearing into the shadows while the rest of the team held the main approach. The gunfire never stopped. It became a rhythm. Target acquisition, double tap, next target, reload, fire again. Over and over until Rourke's hands moved on autopilot and his mind retreated into that cold, analytical space where emotion couldn't reach him. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, not gunfire, not shouting, something else, something wrong. "Listen," Mara hissed. The team went silent, or as silent as possible with hostile forces 50 meters away. And in that brief pause, Rourke heard it too, a grinding, scraping sound, like stone moving against stone, like something heavy being dragged or pushed. "They're bringing up a technical," Mara said, her face going pale beneath the camo paint. "A mounted gun. If they get that into position—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone understood. A heavy machine gun in this confined space would turn the ravine into an abattoir. There would be no cover, no defense, just a wall of bullets chewing through stone and flesh until nothing remained. "How long?" Rourke demanded. 2 minutes, maybe less. Rourke's mind raced through options, discarding each one as fast as it formed. They couldn't retreat. The ravine narrowed to nothing behind them. They couldn't advance. The enemy had overwhelming numbers at the choke point. They couldn't call for fire support. The radio was still spotty, and even if it wasn't, no air asset could reach them in time. They were trapped. "Ideas?" he said to Mara. She looked at him with those winter sky eyes, and for the first time he saw something other than professional calm. He saw calculation, the kind of cold, ruthless math that separated operators who followed orders from operators who survived impossible situations. "There's a reason I know this mountain so well," she said quietly. 3 months of surveillance means 3 months of preparation. I have equipment cached at strategic points, contingency supplies." "What kind of equipment?" "The kind that makes big holes in things." Rourke understood immediately. "Explosives. 60 meters north, hidden in a rock cluster. But someone needs to get there, set them up along the approach, and detonate remotely. And that someone needs to move fast because that technical is getting closer every second." The grinding sound was louder now. Rourke could hear diesel engines straining, metal scraping stone, men shouting directions. They were maybe 90 seconds from having a .50 caliber machine gun pointed down their throats. "I'll go," Rourke said. "No." Mara's voice was flat, final. "You hold the team. I know where the cache is, I know the ground, and I'm faster alone." "You're wounded." Rourke had seen the way she favored her left side, the slight hitch in her movements, blood seeping through her tactical shirt from a wound she hadn't mentioned. "I'm functional. That's all that matters." Before he could argue, she was moving, slipping through a gap in the ravine wall that Rourke would have sworn was too narrow for a human body. 1 second she was there, the next she was gone, vanished into the mountain like smoke. "Cover fire!" Rourke shouted. "Keep them busy!" His team opened up with renewed intensity, pouring rounds down the ravine to keep enemy heads down while Mara did whatever impossible thing she was about to do. The shooting became continuous, deafening. Magazines emptied and were replaced with the last reserves. Brass casings bounced off stone and accumulated at their feet like spent promises. Then Chen's voice crackled over the radio, tight with stress. "Actual, we've got movement in the side passage. Multiple contacts. They're climbing." Of course they were. The enemy commander, Whoever had survived Mara's initial decimation of their leadership was smart enough to probe for weaknesses. The main assault was a fix. The real danger was the flanking force coming up through the cracks in the mountain. Rourke made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he had. "Fall back to the main position," he ordered. "Collapse the perimeter. We hold one choke point only." "Sir, if they get above us—" "I know. Do it anyway." Chen didn't argue. He understood what Rourke was betting on, that Mara would succeed, that the explosives would work, that they could survive long enough for her plan to matter. It was a terrible bet with terrible odds, but it was the only play they had left. The team contracted into a tight defensive position, shoulder to shoulder in the narrowest part of the ravine. 9 operators now. 3 were down to their last magazine, 2 were nursing wounds that would need real medical attention soon, and all of them were running on adrenaline and borrowed time. The grinding sound stopped. Silence fell like a curtain. Then a voice echoed down the ravine, speaking English with a harsh accent that turned every word into a threat. "American soldiers, you are surrounded. Put down weapons, and you will be treated as prisoners of war under Geneva Convention." Ortiz let out a bark of humorless laughter. "Yeah, because they've been real careful about following international law so far." No response, Rourke said quietly. "Let them think we're considering it." He was buying seconds. Precious seconds for Mara to reach the cache, set the charges, get clear. The math was brutal, and everyone knew it. But no one said anything. They just waited in the smoke and the silence while death prepared its final approach. The voice came again, angrier now. "You have 10 seconds. Then we send the gun." Rourke counted in his head. 10, 9, 8. Where was Mara? 7, 6, 5. The grinding sound started again. The technical was moving into position. 4, 3. Still nothing from Mara. No radio call, no signal. Just the sound of the heavy gun being muscled into place and the growing certainty that the next 60 seconds would be the last. 2, 1. The technical's engine revved. Then the entire mountain exploded. The blast came from somewhere ahead, up the ravine toward the enemy position. Not one explosion, but a chain of them. A precisely sequenced cascade of detonations that walked up the approach like the footsteps of an angry god. The sound was beyond deafening. It was physical, a pressure wave that knocked Rourke against the ravine wall and drove the air from his lungs. The ravine filled with dust and smoke so thick it became a physical presence. Rourke couldn't see 3 feet, couldn't hear anything but ringing, couldn't do anything but crouch against the stone and wait for his senses to return. When they did, the world had changed. The grinding sound was gone. The technical was gone. The enemy voices were gone. In their place was a new sound, screaming, confusion, panic, and underneath it all, the rumble of settling rock as tons of stone shifted and found new equilibrium. Mara's voice crackled over the radio, distorted by interference but unmistakably triumphant. "Charges successful. The ravine approach is blocked. Estimated 40% enemy casualties from the blast. The rest are disorganized and falling back. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they regroup." "Where are you at?" Rourke demanded. Static, then. "Complications. Can't make it back to your position. I'm moving to the alternate exfil route, the shepherd track I mentioned. If you want to live, you follow this ravine north for 200 meters, take the left branch when it splits, and climb. I'll meet you at the top." "Mara, move, Captain. That's not a suggestion." The radio went dead. Rourke looked at his team. They looked back at him through the settling dust, their faces masks of exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "You heard her," Rourke said. "Let's move." They moved. The ravine was different now, narrower in places where the explosions had shifted rock, wider in others where stone had crumbled away. They climbed over rubble and squeezed through gaps and kept moving north because stopping meant dying, and dying wasn't on the agenda anymore. The split came exactly where Mara had said it would. Left branch, steep climb. Rourke went first, hauling himself up loose scree that slid away beneath his boots. His team followed in a line, each operator helping the next, moving with the synchronized efficiency of men who had trained together so long they didn't need words. They emerged onto a ledge, maybe 15 feet wide, carved into the mountain's flank like a scar. The shepherd track, ancient, barely maintained, but it led downward in a series of switchbacks that promised eventual escape from this nightmare. Mara was waiting for them. She was leaning against a boulder, her rifle across her lap, her left arm hanging at an angle that made Rourke's medic training scream warnings. Her face was gray with pain and blood loss, but her eyes were still sharp, still focused. "Took you long enough?" she said. "You're hurt. Dislocated shoulder. Happened during the cash run. I'll deal with it later." "You need to deal with it now." "What I need is to get off this mountain before—" She stopped mid-sentence, her head snapping toward the valley below. Rourke heard it too. Engines. Multiple vehicles moving fast on the valley floor. And above that, another sound. Rhythmic. Growing louder. Helicopters. "That's not ours," Mara said, her voice going cold. "Our birds don't fly this sector. That's enemy air." She was right. 2 attack helicopters were rising from the valley, their dark silhouettes growing larger against the pale sky. They were gunships, old Soviet design but well-maintained, bristling with rockets and chain guns, and they were heading straight for the shepherd track. "Cover!" Rourke shouted. His team scattered, diving for whatever protection the rocky ledge offered. It wasn't much. The track was exposed, open, a perfect killing ground for helicopter gunships that could hover and pour fire down with impunity. The lead helicopter opened up. Rockets streaked across the distance, their contrails drawing white lines against the gray sky. They impacted 50 meters down the track in a chain of explosions that threw rock and fire into the air. The second helicopter joined in, its chain gun spinning up with a sound like tearing fabric magnified 1,000 times. Rounds chewed across the ledge, sparking off stone, forcing Rourke's team deeper into inadequate cover. This wasn't a firefight anymore. This was an execution. The helicopters had altitude, firepower, and time. All Rourke had was 12 exhausted operators with nearly empty weapons and nowhere to run. Mara struggled to her feet, cradling her injured arm. "There's a cave system," she said, having to shout over the rotor wash and explosions. 300 meters north. If we can reach it before they cut us off." "We'll never make it," Ortiz interrupted. "They'll tear us apart in the open." He was right. The math was simple and brutal. 300 meters of exposed track versus 2 helicopter gunships with unlimited ammunition. They would be cut down before they made it halfway. Rourke watched the helicopters circle, positioning for another gun run. His mind cycled through options with the desperate speed of a man running out of time. They needed cover they didn't have. They needed weapons they couldn't carry. They needed a miracle that wasn't coming. Then Mara did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. She walked out into the open, just stepped away from cover and stood in the middle of the track, fully exposed, her injured arm hanging useless while her good hand unslung her rifle. The helicopters saw her immediately. Both gunships pivoted toward this single target standing alone and vulnerable in the open. "What the hell are you doing?" Rourke shouted. Mara didn't answer. She just brought the rifle to her shoulder, one-handed, which should have been impossible for a weapon that size, and sighted on the lead helicopter. The gunship's chain gun spun up. Mara fired. The bullet crossed 800 meters of empty air and punched through the helicopter's canopy. Rourke saw the impact. A small, starred hole in the Lexan, barely visible. Nothing that should matter, nothing that could possibly affect an armored attack helicopter. Then the helicopter lurched. The pilot slumped forward. The aircraft pitched nose down. The chain gun went silent mid-burst as the gunner frantically tried to reach the controls. The helicopter spiraled away, trailing smoke. The pilot either dead or incapacitated from a shot that shouldn't have been possible. The second helicopter broke off its attack run, suddenly uncertain. Mara worked the bolt, chambered another round, and tracked the second aircraft with movements that looked almost casual, like she was shooting targets on a range, not dueling with a multi-million-dollar weapons platform designed to destroy ground forces. She fired again. This time the bullet found the tail rotor assembly. Sparks flew. Metal shrieked. The helicopter spun violently, the pilot fighting for control as the damaged rotor screamed and tore itself apart. The aircraft limped away, losing altitude, trailing debris, no longer a threat, but not quite crashed either. Silence fell across the mountain. Mara lowered her rifle and turned to look at Rourke. Her face was pale, sweat mixed with blood and camo paint. Her breath came in short, controlled gasps, but her eyes were steady. The cave system, she said calmly, as if she hadn't just done something impossible. 300 meters north. We should go now. Rourke stared at her. His entire team stared at her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all trying to process what they'd just witnessed. A single wounded operator with a dislocated shoulder taking out 2 attack helicopters with a rifle that wasn't designed for anti-aircraft work. "Who are you?" Rourke asked quietly. Mara met his eyes for a long moment. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the recognition of one professional by another. Then she smiled. It was a tired smile, sad, but real. "I'm the person who wasn't supposed to pull the trigger," she said, "and I'm the person who's going to get you home. So move, Captain, before someone sends more helicopters and I run out of impossible shots." They moved. The 300 meters felt like 3,000, but they made it. The cave entrance was hidden behind a fall of boulders that looked natural but had clearly been arranged by someone who knew what they were doing. Inside, the cave opened into a network of passages that went deep into the mountain, a natural fortress that predated modern warfare by millennia. Mara led them to a chamber maybe 30 feet across, with multiple exits and a small cache of supplies hidden in a crack in the wall. Water, medical supplies, emergency rations. She'd been preparing for this, planning for the day when someone would need to hide in these mountains and survive. "Sit," she told Rourke. "I need you to pop my shoulder back in. You need a hospital. I need to be able to use both arms when the enemy figures out where we went. So sit, Captain, and help me." Rourke sat. Mara positioned herself between his knees, her back to him, and talked him through the reduction procedure with the clinical detachment of someone who'd done this before. When Rourke pulled and rotated her arm in the way she described, the shoulder joint snapped back into place with a sound like a gunshot. Mara didn't scream, didn't even gasp, just went rigid for a moment, then slowly relaxed as the pain shifted from acute to merely terrible. "Better," she said quietly. "Thank you." "Who trained you?" Rourke asked while his medic checked her other injuries. "Not just the shooting, the tactics, the preparation, everything." Mara was silent for a long moment. "I was part of a program," she finally said. "Deep Black. No official name. We were assets for high-value surveillance operations in denied territories. Ghosts. We went where satellites couldn't see and drones couldn't reach. We watched. We reported. We never, ever engaged. Except you just engaged a lot. I broke every rule in the book." Her voice was flat, empty. "My mission was to monitor this sector, report on enemy movements, identify supply routes. I'd been here for 3 months, living in those mountains, watching the valley. When your team got inserted, I recognized the setup immediately. The positioning was too perfect. The intel was too clean. Someone had sold you out. So you decided to play guardian angel." "I decided not to watch 12 people die when I could stop it." Mara turned to look at him, and for the first time her professional mask cracked. Rourke saw grief there. Old grief. Deep scars. 3 years ago, I had a spotter. Best partner I ever worked with. We were on Overwatch for an operation that went sideways. I saw the setup developing, called it in. Command told me to hold position and observe only. I obeyed. My partner died in the ambush I'd warned them about. She looked away. I swore I'd never make that mistake again. Never watch people die because some desk officer valued protocol over lives. So when I saw your team walking into a kill box, I made a choice. Career over conscience isn't a choice at all. The cave fell quiet except for the sound of wind outside and the team getting their injuries addressed by the medic. Rourke studied Mara's profile. This impossible woman who had sacrificed everything to save strangers, who had taken impossible shots and made them look routine, who carried grief like a second skin but still chose to save rather than watch. "The program you were part of," Rourke said carefully. "They're going to come looking for you. They already are. The moment I fired that first shot, my transponder went active. Standard protocol for unauthorized engagement. They know exactly where I am and what I did. And I'm done. Burned. They'll pull me out if they can, debrief me, probably court-martial me for unauthorized use of force. Best case, I get a discharge and spend the rest of my life pretending I was never part of something that officially doesn't exist." Worst case, she shrugged with her good shoulder. There are worse ways to end. Rourke made a decision. You're not going back to them, he said. Mara looked at him sharply. Captain, you saved my team, risked everything, broke your own rules to pull us out of a trap we should never have walked into. You think I'm going to let some shadow program disappear you for doing the right thing? It's not your call. It is now. Rourke's voice carried absolute certainty. When we get extracted, you're coming with us. You're part of my team. You saved us. We save you. That's how this works. You can't protect me from this. Watch me. They locked eyes. Two operators who understood sacrifice, duty, and the cost of choosing principle over protocol. Outside, the wind howled across the mountain. Inside the cave, Rourke's team listened in silence, their expressions making clear whose side they were on. Finally, Mara nodded. Okay, she said quietly, but when this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you. Fair enough. Ortiz's radio suddenly crackled to life with clean signal, the first clear transmission they'd had in hours. Any station this net. This is Saber 1-1. We have you on thermal and are inbound for emergency extraction. Authenticate with your call sign. Rourke grabbed the handset. Saber 1-1, this is Ghostwalker Actual. We're 13 souls in the cave system at... He rattled off the coordinates while looking at Mara. 13, not 12. She caught the number and something flickered in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe. Or hope. Copy 13 souls, Ghostwalker. We have gunships inbound for cover and a Chinook for extract. ETA 12 minutes. Be advised, we're getting reports of enemy air assets in your sector. Negative on enemy air, Rourke said, unable to keep the dry humor from his voice. Our sniper handled it. Say again. Long story. We'll brief on the bird. Ghostwalker Actual out. He handed the radio back to Ortiz and turned to his team. 12 minutes. We hold here until extract arrives. Chen, Ortiz, set security on the cave entrances. Everyone else, check your gear and get ready to move fast when the birds show up. The team moved with renewed energy. They were going home. Battered, exhausted, down to their last ammunition and running on pure adrenaline, but going home alive because a ghost had decided to break her own rules. Mara stood and moved to the cave entrance, looking out at the valley below. Rourke joined her. Together they watched the distant smoke rising from the ravine where the explosives had done their work. Enemy vehicles were visible on the valley floor, milling in confusion, their command structure destroyed and their assault broken. They'll regroup eventually, Mara said. Whoever's running this operation, they're well-funded and organized. This isn't the end of it. But it's the end for today. Rourke paused. And you made that possible. We made that possible. Your team climbed a mountain under fire to save someone they'd never met. That's not training, that's character. Learned it from good examples. They stood in comfortable silence while the wind carried the sound of approaching helicopters. American helicopters this time, coming to pull them out of the nightmare. Rourke thought about the debriefing that was coming, the questions, the investigation into how this mission had gone so catastrophically wrong, the explanations he'd have to give about the unauthorized operator who had saved them all. He'd burn every bridge he had to keep his promise, pull every favor, call in every debt, whatever it took to make sure Mara didn't disappear into the dark machinery of black programs and classified tribunals. She'd saved them. Now it was his turn. Captain, Mara said quietly, still watching the valley, what I did today, the shots, the tactics, the cache preparation, it's going to raise questions you can't answer, questions about programs you don't have clearance to know about. They're going to pressure you, hard. Let them. You don't understand what you're up against. I understand loyalty, I understand debt, and I understand that some rules deserve to be broken. He turned to face her. You're not alone in this anymore, Mara. Get used to it. She looked at him for a long moment, those winter sky eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. But when we get back and the hammer drops, remember that I gave you an out. You could have left me behind. Should have, tactically speaking. Tactically speaking, leaving behind our best asset would have been stupid. I'm not your asset. No, Rourke agreed. Your family. There's a difference. The helicopters appeared on the horizon, two Apache gunships running escort for a massive Chinook, all three aircraft flying fast and low. The cavalry had arrived. The nightmare was ending. But as Mara watched them approach, she couldn't shake the feeling that a different kind of storm was just beginning. She'd broken sacred rules, exposed a program that lived in shadows, fired shots that would echo through classified corridors and secure briefing rooms. Someone was going to pay for that. She just hoped it wouldn't be the man standing beside her, who'd chosen honor over orders and was about to discover what that choice really cost. The Chinook settled into a hover above the cave mouth, its massive rotors beating the air into submission. Crew chiefs appeared in the door, already lowering the penetrator for extraction. Rourke's team moved with practiced efficiency, hooking up and getting hauled aboard in pairs. Mara went last, with Rourke. As they lifted off the mountain, she looked down at the valley one final time. 3 months she'd spent in these rocks. 3 months watching, waiting, reporting, living like a ghost because that's what the mission required. Then she'd pulled the trigger, and the ghost had become real. There was no going back from that. No returning to the shadows. No pretending she was content to watch while others fought and died. She'd chosen a side, made herself visible, declared that some things mattered more than mission parameters. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. The helicopter gained altitude, and the mountain shrank beneath them. Inside the aircraft, Rourke's team sat in exhausted silence, their faces showing the strain of a mission that should have ended in a shallow grave. But they were alive. Wounded, but alive. And as they looked at the woman who'd saved them, their expressions carried something that Mara hadn't seen directed at her in years. Respect, gratitude, acceptance. She'd been alone for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself, to have teammates instead of just mission objectives, to matter as a person rather than just an asset. Rourke caught her eye across the cabin and nodded once. A promise, a commitment. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Mara nodded back, and for the first time since pulling that first trigger, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, breaking the rules had been worth it after all. The helicopter turned south toward home, carrying 13 souls who'd survived the impossible, and one ghost who'd finally found her way back to the living. The Chinook touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel exactly 47 minutes after lifting off from the mountain. The moment the wheels hit tarmac, Rourke knew something was wrong. The usual organized chaos of a combat extraction wasn't there. No medics rushing forward, no logistics personnel prepping for debriefing. Instead, there were 4 armed military police standing in a loose perimeter around the landing zone, and behind them, a black SUV with windows tinted so dark they looked like voids. Mara saw it too. Her body language shifted subtly. Weight redistributing, muscles tensing beneath exhaustion. The relaxation she'd shown during the flight evaporated like morning frost. "That's not standard procedure," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the dying whine of the helicopter's turbines. "No," Rourke agreed, "it's not." The crew chief appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd been given orders he didn't like but would follow anyway. "Captain Rourke, you and your team are to proceed directly to debriefing room 3. Medical attention will be provided there." He paused, his eyes flicking to Mara. "The female operator is to come with me, separate debrief." "Negative," Rourke said flatly. "She's with my team. We debrief together." "Sir, I have explicit orders." "I don't care what orders you have. She saved 12 American lives today. She's not going anywhere without me." The crew chief's jaw tightened. He glanced at the MPs, then back at Rourke, clearly calculating whether this was a fight he wanted to have with the special operations captain, who looked like he'd just walked out of hell and was in no mood for bureaucratic protocol. Before he could respond, the SUV's rear door opened. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, civilian clothes that somehow looked more military than actual uniforms, dark hair pulled back in a style that prioritized function over fashion. She moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who'd spent time in the field before graduating to positions where other people did the bleeding. She walked directly to the helicopter without acknowledging the MPs or the crew chief. "Captain Rourke," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "I'm Director Sarah Vance, Special Activities Division. I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Voss. Now. Alone. Mara went very still. Rourke stepped between them. With respect, ma'am, my team just survived an ambush that killed... He caught himself. His team had survived. Nobody had died. That nearly killed all of us. Sergeant Voss is the only reason we're having this conversation. So whatever this is about, it can wait until after proper medical attention and team debriefing. Vance's expression didn't change. Captain, I appreciate what Sergeant Voss did for your team, truly. But she violated protocols that exist for reasons you don't have clearance to understand. This isn't a request. Then get me clearance. That's not how this works. Then we have a problem. They locked eyes, two people accustomed to being obeyed, neither willing to back down. The tension stretched like wire pulled too tight. Behind Rourke, his team had formed up without being ordered to, a silent wall of battered operators who'd already decided whose side they were on. Mara put a hand on Rourke's shoulder. It's okay, she said quietly. I knew this was coming. You don't have to go with her. Actually, I do. Mara's voice carried resigned acceptance. Director Vance didn't come here because she wants to. She came here because she has to. Protocol demands it, and fighting it just makes things worse for everyone. She stepped past Rourke and faced Vance directly. I'll come willingly, Mara said, but I wanted on record that Captain Rourke and his team had no knowledge of my operational status. They believed I was an unauthorized asset acting independently. Anything I did was my decision alone. Noted, Vance said. Then almost gently, Mara, you know how this works. Come quietly and we can handle this professionally. And if I don't come quietly, then those MPs have orders to ensure compliance. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Mara looked back at Rourke one last time. Something passed between them. Gratitude, regret, the acknowledgement that some battles couldn't be won with rifles and tactics. Thank you, she said, for climbing that mountain, for making me part of the count, for treating me like I mattered. You do matter, Rourke said. We'll see. She turned and walked toward the SUV with her head high and her shoulders square, looking nothing like a woman heading for a reckoning that could end her career and possibly her freedom. She looked like a soldier reporting for duty. Vance followed a half-step behind, her expression unreadable. The SUV's door closed with the final sound of a cell locking. Rourke watched it drive away, every instinct screaming at him to do something, but tactical reality keeping his feet planted. Fighting here, now, would only make things worse. But he'd be damned if he'd abandon her to whatever machinery was about to grind her up for doing the right thing. Sir? Chen said quietly. Orders? Rourke turned to face his team, 12 exhausted faces looking at him for guidance in a situation that had no easy answers. Medical attention first, he said. Then we write the most detailed, accurate after-action report in the history of special operations. Every shot she fired, every life she saved, every impossible thing she did that kept us breathing. We document everything, and then we make sure every person up the chain of command understands exactly what they're about to do if they burn her for it. They're not going to like that, Ortiz said. I don't care what they like. Let's move. The debriefing room was exactly what Rourke expected. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a conference table that had hosted 1,000 similar sessions, and 2 intelligence officers who looked like they'd been pulled from whatever they were doing and told to extract information from a team that wasn't supposed to exist in a mission that officially never happened. The lead officer was a major named Kellerman, early 30s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent more time in briefing rooms than battlefields. His partner was a civilian analyst named Torres, who took notes on a tablet and said nothing. Kellerman waited until Rourke's team was seated before speaking. Gentlemen, I need to understand exactly what happened out there, from the beginning. Leave nothing out. Where's Sergeant Voss? Rourke asked. That's not your concern. It is when she's the reason we're alive to have this conversation. Kellerman's expression tightened. Captain, I understand you've had a difficult day, but Sergeant Voss is being handled by people with appropriate clearance. Your concern is providing an accurate account of your mission. Our mission was a setup, Rourke said flatly. Someone fed us poisoned intelligence. Minimal security turned out to be a fortified position with 100+ hostiles who knew exactly when and where we'd be. Either your intelligence was catastrophically wrong, or someone deliberately walked us into a kill box. That got Kellerman's attention. He leaned forward, his bureaucratic detachment replaced by something sharper. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. My team was inserted on the basis of intelligence that bore no resemblance to ground truth. We were told minimal resistance. We found a prepared ambush with pre-positioned forces, coordinated tactics, and communications jamming. That doesn't happen by accident. Torres stopped typing and looked up for the first time. Are you suggesting the intelligence community deliberately compromised your operation? Kellerman's voice carried warning. This was dangerous territory. I'm suggesting someone did. Whether it was deliberate compromise or catastrophic incompetence, I can't say. But 12 operators nearly died because the information we relied on was either wrong or a lie. Kellerman sat back, his mind visibly working through the implications. A compromised operation was bad. A compromised operation that suggested insider involvement was a political nightmare that could destroy careers and trigger investigations that reached far beyond one failed mission. Walk me through it, he said. Everything. Start with the initial briefing. Rourke did. He walked them through every phase of the operation with clinical precision. The insertion, the rally point, the discovery that the target site was actually a trap, the communications blackout, the overwhelming enemy force. He detailed the tactical situation that had degraded from difficult to impossible in the span of minutes. Then he got to Mara. We were pinned down in a defensive position that couldn't hold. No comms, no air support, enemy forces closing from multiple directions. We were calculating how to break out when the shooting started from upslope. What shooting? Kellerman asked. Precision rifle fire from an elevated position approximately 800 meters from our location. Single shooter, taking out enemy commanders and heavy weapons operators. The shots were... Rourke paused, searching for words that could describe what he'd witnessed. They were beyond expert level. Each shot counted. Each target mattered. Whoever was shooting knew exactly how to dismantle an enemy formation. And you had no advanced knowledge of this asset? None. She wasn't on our mission brief, wasn't on any support roster. As far as we knew, we were the only friendly forces in that sector. Kellerman exchanged a glance with Torres. Something unspoken passed between them. Continue, Kellerman said. Rourke described the climb to Mara's position, the discovery of her hide site, the desperate fighting withdrawal into the ravine system. He detailed her knowledge of the terrain, her preparation, the cache of explosives that had broken the enemy assault. He described the impossible helicopter shots, the extraction, every moment that demonstrated not just Mara's skill, but her absolute commitment to saving people she had no obligation to protect. When he finished, the room was silent. Torres had stopped taking notes. Kellerman sat very still, his expression unreadable. Captain, Kellerman finally said, do you have any idea what program Sergeant Voss belongs to? No, and I don't need to. What I know is that she saved 12 American lives at the cost of her own career. That's all that matters. That's not all that matters. These programs exist in shadows for reasons. They have protocols, rules. Sergeant Voss violated those rules when she engaged. She violated rules to prevent a massacre, Rourke said, his voice going hard. If you're suggesting she should have watched us die to maintain protocol, then your priorities are seriously screwed up. That's not what I'm suggesting, but actions have consequences. She exposed a classified asset, compromised an ongoing surveillance operation, used equipment and tactics that are now visible to hostile intelligence services. The fallout from this goes far beyond one successful rescue. Then handle the fallout, but don't punish someone for choosing lives over paperwork. Kellerman looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been sympathy. Captain, you're thinking like a field operator. I respect that. But the people making decisions about Sergeant Voss think like strategists. They see the larger picture, the precedent this sets, the message it sends. If operators can break protocol whenever they feel the situation warrants it, the entire system breaks down. The system already broke down when it sent my team into an ambush, and that will be investigated thoroughly, but it doesn't change what Sergeant Voss did. Rourke leaned forward, his patience finally breaking. Let me make something very clear, Major. Sergeant Voss is a hero. She's a professional who saw American lives in danger and acted to save them despite knowing it would cost her everything. If your system punishes that kind of courage and moral clarity, then your system is broken and needs to be torn down and rebuilt. That's above your pay grade, Captain. Then get me someone whose pay grade it isn't above, because I'm not letting this go. Sergeant Voss is part of my team now. I protect my team. Period. The door opened. Director Vance walked in, and the entire energy of the room shifted. Kellerman and Torres stood immediately, their body language deferential in a way that told Rourke exactly how much pull Vance had in this world. "Major, I'll take it from here," Vance said. It wasn't a request. Kellerman and Torres left without a word. Vance sat down across from Rourke, her expression thoughtful. "You're making a lot of people nervous, Captain," she said. "Good. They should be nervous. They nearly got my team killed. That's being investigated. I'm not here about the mission failure. I'm here about Mara. Where is she? Secured, safe, being debriefed by people who understand the program she belongs to." Vance paused. "The program I run." That explained the immediate response. The black SUV, the authority that shut down arguments and moved MPs like chess pieces. "What happens to her?" Rourke asked. "That depends on a lot of factors. What she tells us in her debrief. How much damage her exposure caused. Whether hostile intelligence services identified her before we pulled her out. And," Vance's expression softened slightly, "whether I can convince my superiors that what she did was justified." "It was justified. She saved 12 lives." "I know. I read the preliminary reports. I also know Mara. She's one of the best assets we've ever fielded. Disciplined, skilled, completely committed to the mission, which is why her decision to break protocol is so significant. Mara doesn't make mistakes. If she chose to engage, she had a reason. She had 12 reasons. My team." "Tell me about her performance," Vance said, changing tack. "Not the tactics, the person. What did you see when you met her?" Rourke thought about the woman he'd found in that mountain hide. Calm under pressure, professional despite exhaustion, willing to sacrifice everything for people she didn't know. "I saw someone who understood the difference between following orders and doing what's right," he said. "Someone who'd made that choice before and paid for it. Someone who wasn't going to make the same mistake twice." Vance's eyes sharpened. "She told you about her spotter?" "She mentioned it 3 years ago. She called in a warning. Command ignored it. Her partner died." Vance nodded slowly. "Daniel Chen, good kid, 24 years old, died in an ambush that Mara identified 6 hours before it happened. Command thought she was being overcautious. Turned out she was exactly right. She's carried that weight ever since. So when she saw my team walking into a similar situation, she couldn't watch it happen again." "Yeah." Vance was quiet for a moment. "The thing you need to understand about operators like Mara is that they see the world differently. They spend months alone in hostile territory, watching, waiting. They become part of the landscape, and sometimes that isolation changes them, makes them question whether the mission is worth the cost, whether watching is enough." "She decided it wasn't." "She decided you were worth saving, even if it meant ending everything she'd built." Rourke met Vance's eyes. "What are you going to do with her?" "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. The easy answer is to pull her, debrief her, and reassign her to a desk where she can't cause more trouble. That's what the protocol says. That's what my superiors want." But I've spent 20 years in this business, Captain. I've seen operators make calls in the field that looked crazy from a briefing room but saved lives on the ground. I've seen the difference between someone who follows rules and someone who understands why the rules exist. Mara is the latter. And people like that are too valuable to throw away just because they made command uncomfortable. "So you'll protect her?" "I'll try. But I need ammunition. I need evidence that what she did wasn't just a rogue operator breaking protocol. I need proof that the system failed first, that she was the failsafe when everything else collapsed." Rourke understood immediately. "The poisoned intelligence." "Exactly. If I can prove your mission was compromised, either through incompetence or malice, then Mara's actions become a necessary response to a critical failure. She becomes the professional who saved lives when the system broke down, not the problem child who ignored orders." "We'll give you everything," Rourke said. "Every detail of the briefing, every discrepancy between what we were told and what we found. Every moment that screamed setup. You'll have enough to hang whoever fed us that information. Good, because that's what I need to keep Mara from getting hung instead. Vance stood, preparing to leave, but she paused at the door and looked back. Captain, can I give you some advice? Off the record? Go ahead. You're loyal, that's admirable, but loyalty in this world can be dangerous. The people who sent you into that valley made a mistake. Maybe a terrible mistake. Maybe a deliberate one. Either way, they have power and resources you don't. If you push too hard, ask too many questions, make too much noise, they'll push back, and they'll win. I don't care. You should, because if they destroy your career, you can't help Mara. You can't protect your team. You're just another casualty of a system that values quiet compliance over loud integrity. Rourke considered that. So what do you suggest? Be smart. Document everything. Build an airtight case. But let me run point. I have the clearances. I have the access. I can ask questions you can't without triggering defensive reactions. Trust me to fight this battle while you focus on keeping your team intact and ready. It went against every instinct Rourke had. Letting someone else fight while he stood back felt like abandonment, like betrayal. But Vance was right. This wasn't a firefight where the loudest voice and the most aggressive action won. This was a different kind of war, one fought in briefing rooms and classified reports, where the wrong move could end careers and bury truth under layers of national security classification. Okay, Rourke said, but I want regular updates. And if it looks like you're losing, we go loud. I'll burn every bridge I have to if that's what it takes. Vance smiled slightly. It was a tired smile. The smile of someone who'd fought these battles before and knew the cost. I'd expect nothing less, she said. Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it. And your team, she gestured toward the door where Rourke's operators waited. Take care of them. They just survived something that should have killed them. The adrenaline will fade. The questions will come. Make sure they know they did everything right. She left. Rourke sat alone in the debriefing room for a long moment, processing everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. This morning, he'd been a captain running what should have been a routine operation. Now he was at the center of a shitstorm involving compromised intelligence, black programs, and a woman who'd sacrificed everything to save people she didn't know. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like physical pressure. He stood and walked out to where his team waited. They looked rough, bandages visible under hasty field dressing, exhaustion written in every line of their bodies, but their eyes were alert, watching, waiting for his lead. How bad is it? Chen asked quietly. Bad, but manageable. Director Vance is on our side. She's going to investigate the intelligence failure and try to protect Mara from the bureaucratic fallout. And if she can't, then we make enough noise that they can't bury her quietly. Ortiz nodded slowly. We're with you, sir. Whatever it takes. The others murmured agreement. These men had climbed a mountain under fire because Rourke had asked them to. They'd trust him through worse. Get cleaned up, Rourke ordered. Real food, real sleep. Tomorrow we start writing the most detailed AAR anyone's ever seen. We're going to document every moment of that mission, every decision, every bullet fired. And we're going to make sure the people reading it understand exactly what Sergeant Voss did and why it mattered. Yes, sir. The team dispersed, heading for the medical bay and then the barracks. Rourke watched them go. These professionals who'd survived the impossible and were now facing a different kind of battle. The kind where the enemy wore suits instead of uniforms and killed careers instead of people. He thought about Mara, wherever she was, being debriefed, questioned, forced to justify actions that should have required no justification. Facing the machinery of a system that valued protocol over results, quiet compliance over loud courage. She'd saved them. Now it was his turn to return the favor. The investigation took 3 days. 3 days of interviews, document reviews, signal intelligence analysis, and the kind of deep forensic examination that pulled apart every aspect of the mission from initial tasking to final extraction. Rourke spent most of that time in briefing rooms, answering the same questions over and over, walking investigators through timelines and decisions until the words became mechanical. But he never deviated from the truth, never softened the criticism of the intelligence that had nearly killed them. never downplayed what Mara had done to pull them out. On the fourth day, Vance called him to her office. It was a small space, surprisingly austere for someone with her level of authority. No decorations except for a single photograph on the desk. Vance in field gear, younger, standing with a team of operators in some desert that could have been any of a dozen conflict zones. "Sit," she said without preamble. Rourke sat. Vance looked tired. The kind of tired that came from fighting battles against enemies who never had to set foot in the field themselves. "We found it," she said, "the source of the poisoned intelligence." Rourke leaned forward. "Who?" "Not who. What?" "It was a deliberate disinformation operation. Someone fed false intelligence into our collection system, knowing it would be assessed as credible and passed up the chain. They created a perfect trap, real facility, real weapons cache, but surrounded by forces that weren't in any of the satellite imagery or signals intercepts. How is that possible? Because they knew our collection patterns, knew when our satellites passed overhead, knew which signals we monitored. They showed us exactly what we wanted to see and hid everything else." Vance's expression was grim. It was sophisticated, professional, the kind of operation that requires serious resources and inside knowledge. "You're saying someone with access to our intelligence methods deliberately set up my team to be killed?" "I'm saying someone created conditions where your team would be inserted into an ambush. Whether they specifically targeted you or whether you were just convenient, we don't know yet. But yes, this was deliberate." Rourke felt ice in his veins. "Do we know who?" "We have theories, nothing conclusive yet. But the investigation is ongoing and it goes high enough that people are getting very nervous." Vance paused. "Which brings me to Mara." "What about her?" "The official review board met this morning. I presented my findings about the intelligence compromise. Made it clear that your team was sent into a trap without adequate support or accurate information. Emphasized that Mara's intervention was the only reason 12 operators survived. And the board agreed that disciplinary action would be inappropriate given the circumstances. Mara is being officially reassigned. No court-martial, no punishment. She's being pulled from the surveillance program and transferred to a new assignment." Relief flooded through Rourke. "Where?" Vance smiled slightly. "That's up to you, actually. I made a recommendation, told them that Sergeant Voss demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment and field initiative, suggested she'd be wasted behind a desk, proposed that she be assigned to a unit that could use her skill set properly. You recommended her for my team." "I recommended her for special operations duty, specifically for an operator slot with a team that already knows her capabilities and has proven they'll fight for her. If you want her, she's yours." Rourke felt something shift in his chest. Relief, gratitude, the sense that sometimes the system actually worked the way it was supposed to. "I want her," he said. "Good, because she's waiting outside. I thought you might want to tell her yourself." Vance stood and opened the office door. Mara walked in, and Rourke saw immediately that the past few days had been hard on her. She looked clean, rested, physically recovered, but her eyes carried the weight of 3 days spent justifying herself to people who would never understand what she'd done or why it mattered. She saw Rourke and stopped. "Captain," she said formally. "Mara." He stood. "Director Vance just told me the news." "Yeah." Her voice was carefully neutral. "No punishment, just reassignment. I guess I should be grateful." "You should be celebrated. What you did saved lives. What I did violated protocol and exposed a classified program. The fact that I'm not in a cell is more than I expected." Rourke crossed the office to stand in front of her. "The fact that you're not being given a medal is a failure of the system. But we work within reality, not ideals. And the reality is that you're being assigned to my team. If you want it." Mara's carefully controlled expression cracked. Surprise. Hope. Uncertainty. "Your team? You saved us, climbed into hell with us, proved you're the kind of operator we need. So, yeah, my team. If you'll have us." She looked at him for a long moment, those winter sky eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she nodded slowly. "I'm not used to working with a team," she said quietly. "I've been alone for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to trust people that way." You trusted us on that mountain. That was different. That was survival. This is survival too, just a different kind. Rourke offered his hand. So what do you say, Sergeant? Ready to stop being a ghost and start being part of something real? Mara looked at his hand, at his face, at the future he was offering, a future where she didn't have to hide in shadows or watch from a distance, where she could be part of something instead of apart from everything. She took his hand. Yeah, she said, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, really smiled. I'm ready. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, but it changed everything. Mara felt the shift immediately, the weight lifting from shoulders that had carried isolation like armor for 3 years. Rourke's grip was firm, steady, the kind of contact that promised something she'd almost forgotten existed. Partnership. Trust. The knowledge that when the bullet started flying, someone would be there beside her instead of 800 meters away, watching through a scope. Vance cleared her throat, breaking the moment. Sergeant Voss, you're officially assigned to Captain Rourke's team effective immediately. Your security clearances will be adjusted accordingly. Your previous program classification remains sealed. As far as anyone outside this room is concerned, you were a specialized reconnaissance asset temporarily attached to support operations in that sector. And the truth? Mara asked. The truth stays buried where it belongs, for your protection as much as ours. Vance's expression softened slightly. You get a second chance, Mara. Most people in our line of work don't. Use it well. I will. Good. Captain Rourke, your team has 72 hours stand down for medical recovery and debriefing completion. After that, you're back on the rotation. Questions? Just one, Rourke said. The investigation into the intelligence compromise. How far up does it go? Vance's face went carefully neutral. That's above your clearance level now, but I can tell you this, people are paying attention, the kind of attention that makes careers end quietly and suddenly. Justice doesn't always look like you want it to, but it happens. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was honest, and Rourke had learned to value honesty over comfort. Understood, he said. Then you're dismissed. Get some rest, both of you. They walked out of Vance's office together, stepping into the fluorescent-lit corridor of the administrative building. The base was transitioning from day to evening shift, personnel moving with purpose, radios crackling with routine traffic. The familiar machinery of military life grinding forward regardless of what had happened in the mountains. Mara stopped just outside the door, looking around like she was seeing it all for the first time. You okay? Rourke asked. I'm not sure yet. 3 days ago I was living in a cave eating field rations and watching the valley through a scope. Now I'm... She gestured vaguely at the building around them. Part of something. It's strange. Strange good or strange bad? Strange like, I don't know how to do this anymore. Work with people. Trust them. Be part of a team instead of an observer watching from the outside. Rourke understood. He'd seen it before in operators who'd spent too long in isolated positions. The skills that made you good at solo operations, self-reliance, emotional distance, the ability to make life or death decisions without consultation, were the same skills that made you bad at teamwork. Then you learn, he said simply, same way you learned everything else, through repetition and failure and eventually getting it right. What if I can't? You climbed a mountain under fire to save people you'd never met. You broke every rule you had to save 12 lives. You've got the hardest part already. You give a damn. The rest is just mechanics. Mara smiled slightly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. And you're not doing it alone this time. They walked across the base toward the team barracks, the evening air cool against skin that still remembered the mountain's bitter wind. Other personnel passed them, some offering nods of recognition to Rourke, others glancing curiously at Mara, this unfamiliar operator who'd appeared from nowhere and was now walking beside their captain like she belonged. Chen intercepted them halfway across the compound. He had fresh bandages on his left arm and moved with the slight stiffness that suggested bruised ribs, but his expression brightened when he saw Mara. Sergeant Voss, he said. Good to see you vertical and not in handcuffs. Good to be vertical and not in handcuffs, Mara replied. How's the team? Healing. Ortiz needed 12 stitches for that rock fragment. Kim's got a concussion from a near miss that rang her bell pretty good. Everyone else is banged up, but functional. We've been taking bets on whether they'd let you stay or disappear you to some black site in the desert. And who won? Nobody yet. We couldn't decide if you'd stay or if the captain would have to break you out. Chen's grin was genuine. Glad it didn't come to that. Breaking people out of black sites is above my pay grade. Mine too, Rourke said. She's assigned to the team now. Officially. Chen's eyebrows rose. Seriously? Seriously. Outstanding. Chen extended his hand to Mara. Welcome to the team. Fair warning. We are functional alcoholics who cope with trauma through dark humor and excessive PT. If you can't run 6 miles before breakfast while making inappropriate jokes, you'll fit right in. Mara shook his hand, something loosening in her chest. This was the part she'd forgotten, the camaraderie, the casual acceptance, the sense that you were part of something larger than yourself. I think I can manage that, she said. Good. Because the team wants to buy you a drink. Well, several drinks. Possibly an entire bottle. You saved our asses, and we're not the kind of people who forget that. I'm not much of a drinker. Then you can watch us drink while we embarrass ourselves with increasingly exaggerated versions of what happened on that mountain. Chen's expression turned serious. But really, thank you for what you did up there. I know it cost you. It was worth it. Yeah, it was. They found the rest of the team in the common area of the barracks, a space that had been converted from military sterile to something resembling actual human habitation through years of small rebellions against regulation. Someone had hung curtains. Someone else had brought in furniture that didn't come from military surplus. There was even a small kitchen area where operators could make real food instead of surviving on DFAC meals and MREs. The entire team was there. Kim with a bandage covering the left side of her head, Ortiz with his arm in a sling, 8 others in various states of recovery, all of them looking up when Mara walked in. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ortiz stood and started clapping. The others joined in, a wave of applause that filled the small space, genuine and unforced. Mara stood in the doorway, completely unprepared for this. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, being forgotten, being the asset that nobody acknowledged and few people knew existed. This was the opposite of that. Speech, someone called out. Absolutely not, Mara said, but she was smiling, really smiling. Come on, you single-handedly took out 2 attack helicopters with a rifle. You've got to have something to say about that. I got lucky. Bullshit, Kim said from her position on the couch. I watched through binos. That wasn't luck. That was skill I didn't know was possible. Kim's right, another operator added. You made shots that physics says shouldn't work. We're pretty sure you're either a cyborg or some kind of supernatural entity that decided to help us out. Mara felt heat rising in her cheeks. She wasn't used to praise, wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. For 3 years, success meant nobody noticing you existed. Rourke rescued her. All right, let her breathe. She just got assigned to the team. You've got plenty of time to make her regret that decision. He caught Mara's eye. Grab some food. Relax. You've earned it. She did. Someone had ordered pizza, real pizza from a local place that delivered to the base, not the cardboard approximation served in the DFAC. Mara took a slice and found a seat in the corner where she could watch the team interact. Their dynamics were easy, practiced. They knew each other's rhythms, knew when to push and when to back off, knew how to turn horror into humor and trauma into bonding. She'd forgotten what that looked like from the inside. Ortiz dropped into the chair beside her, balancing a plate loaded with 3 slices and a beer. You look uncomfortable, he observed. I'm not used to this. What, pizza? People, groups, being part of instead of apart from. Ortiz nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. I did 6 months of solo recon work early in my career, came back and couldn't handle being in crowds. Took me weeks to remember how to have normal conversations. He took a bite of pizza. Give it time. Your brain will adjust. What if it doesn't? Then we adjust to you. That's how teams work. We're not all the same. Kim's an introvert who needs alone time to recharge. Chen processes stress through constant motion. If he's not moving, he's spiraling. I cope through humor that's probably unhealthy but keeps me functional. He gestured around the room. We're all broken in different ways. We just make it work. I shot my own teammate once, Mara said quietly. The words came out before she could stop them. Training exercise, live fire drill. My spotter moved into my line of fire at the wrong moment, and I didn't see him in time. The round went through his shoulder. He lived, but she stopped, surprised she'd shared that. It wasn't something she talked about, wasn't something anyone outside her old program knew. Ortiz didn't react with shock or judgment, just nodded like she'd told him something mundane. I froze during a firefight in my second deployment, he said. Complete lockup. Couldn't move, couldn't shoot, couldn't do anything except stand there while rounds snapped past my head. My team leader had to physically drag me to cover, saved my life, and probably died a little inside having to babysit me. What happened? I got help. Talked to someone who understood combat stress, worked through it, came back stronger. He met her eyes. Point is, we've all got ghosts, all got moments we're not proud of. The question isn't whether you're perfect, it's whether you learn and keep moving forward. Mara looked around the room at these operators who'd survived the impossible with her. They were laughing now, sharing stories, probably exaggerating details the way soldiers always did. But underneath the humor was something real. Brotherhood. Family. The kind of bond that formed when you survived hell together and came out the other side still caring about each other. I can do that, she said. Keep moving forward. Good. Because we're going to need you. Ortiz stood, his plate empty. And for what it's worth, you're already one of us. You just need to convince yourself of that. The evening wore on. The pizza disappeared. Stories got more elaborate and less truthful with each telling. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey that was definitely not authorized on base, but somehow appeared anyway. Mara found herself relaxing degree by degree, the tension of 3 years of isolation slowly unwinding. Rourke watched from across the room, nursing a single beer and letting his team decompress in the way they needed. This was important. The bonding that happened after surviving something that should have killed you. The moment when the adrenaline faded and you looked around and realized you were still alive, and the people beside you were the reason why. Kim made her way over to where he stood. She's going to be good for us, Kim said quietly, once she figures out how to trust it. Yeah, I think so too. You know the team's already talking about her like she's been with us for years, right? Chen's already planning training scenarios that involve her providing overwatch. Ortiz wants her to teach him long-range shooting techniques. They've adopted her. She earned it. She did. But she's also fragile right now. 3 years alone does things to people. We need to be patient. Rourke glanced at Kim. When did you become the team therapist? When I took a psychology minor in college and discovered that understanding people is just as important as understanding tactics. She touched the bandage on her head absently. I'm just saying, be gentle. She's raw in ways that don't show on the surface. Noted. The celebration wound down around midnight. Operators drifted off to their racks, exhaustion finally overcoming adrenaline and alcohol. Mara stayed until the end, helping clean up in the way that suggested she was uncomfortable being the first to leave. Rourke found her in the small kitchen, washing dishes that could have been left for morning. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, but I want to. Feels normal. Normal's overrated. Maybe, but I'll take it right now. She dried her hands and turned to face him. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you climb that mountain? You could have used the chaos to extract, could have saved your team and left me to handle my own mess. But you didn't. Why? Rourke thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated. Tactical reasoning mixed with instinct, mixed with something deeper that he didn't have words for. Because you saved us, he finally said. And because leaving someone behind who'd just done that felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it violated tactical sense, but sometimes you make calls based on what's right instead of what's smart. That's how people get killed. That's how people stay human. He met her eyes. You want to know the real reason? I saw what you did. Not just the shooting, anyone can pull a trigger. I saw you break your own rules to save people you didn't know. I saw courage that most operators never find. And I thought, If someone like that dies alone on a mountain because I chose the tactically sound option, then what the hell am I doing this for? Mara was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, she finally said, for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me part of something again. You chose us first. I just returned the favor. She nodded, then surprised him by stepping forward and pulling him into a hug. It was brief, awkward, the embrace of someone who'd forgotten how physical contact worked, but genuine. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. Sorry, I'm not usually... Don't apologize. We just survived something impossible. You're allowed to feel it. I don't know how to do this yet. Be part of a team, trust people. Let people see me. You'll learn. We'll teach you. That's what teams do. Mara smiled through the tears. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. Please do. She left for her assigned quarters, a small room in the barracks that would become hers, a physical space that represented belonging instead of transit. Rourke stayed in the kitchen, thinking about the past week and how quickly everything had changed. 7 days ago, he'd been planning a routine operation. Now he was at the center of an intelligence investigation, had gained one of the most skilled operators he'd ever seen, and was facing questions about loyalty and protocol that didn't have easy answers. But his team was alive. That was what mattered. Everything else was just details. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of medical checkups, paperwork, and the mandatory psychological evaluations that followed any operation where things went catastrophically wrong. Rourke sat through 3 separate interviews with counselors who wanted to talk about stress and trauma, and making sure he was processing things in healthy ways. He gave them the answers they needed to hear while keeping the truth buried where it belonged. Yes, he was sleeping fine. No, he wasn't having intrusive thoughts. Yes, he felt supported by his team and command. The lies came easily because he'd learned years ago that honesty in these sessions just meant more sessions. Mara struggled more with the evaluations. She'd spent 3 years training herself not to show emotion, not to form attachments, not to process trauma in ways that could compromise operational security. Undoing that programming in 72 hours wasn't possible. But she tried. Rourke found her on the 3rd day, sitting alone on a bench near the base perimeter, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and red that reminded him too much of muzzle flashes and burning helicopters. You okay? He asked, sitting down beside her. The psych evaluator told me I have significant emotional barriers consistent with prolonged isolation and unresolved grief. Apparently, I need to engage with my support network and develop healthy coping mechanisms. She said it in the flat, clinical tone of someone quoting a report they didn't agree with. That's a fancy way of saying you're human and you've been through hell. I know, but it doesn't make it easier. She was quiet for a moment. They asked me about Daniel, my spotter, the one who died. What did you tell them? The truth? That I blame myself? That I still blame myself? That I see his face every time I close my eyes and wonder if I could have done something different? Could you have? No. Command made the call. I just had to live with the consequences. She looked at him. Is it always like this? The guilt? The second guessing? The feeling that you should have been able to save everyone? Yeah, it is. Anyone who tells you it gets easier is lying. You just get better at carrying it. That's not very comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to tell you the truth. Mara smiled slightly. I appreciate that. The evaluator kept trying to make me feel better, kept telling me it wasn't my fault, and I should forgive myself, and all these things that sound nice, but don't actually change anything. Guilt's not something you fix. It's something you use. You remember the people you couldn't save, and you make damn sure their deaths meant something. You get better, smarter, faster. You make choices that honor them instead of betray them. Is that what you do? Every day. They sat in silence while the sun finished its descent, and the base lights flickered on, harsh artificial white, replacing the warm natural colors. A patrol moved past on their perimeter check, nodding respectfully to Rourke before continuing on. I got word today, Rourke said after a while, about the investigation. Mara turned to look at him. And? 3 senior intelligence analysts have been quietly reassigned. 2 mid-level operatives are under investigation for security violations. The exact details are classified above my clearance, but the message is clear. Someone's paying for what happened to us. Is it enough? It's never enough. But it's something. He paused. Vance also told me they identified the source of the disinformation. Foreign intelligence service working with inside help. The people who set the trap knew our methods, our timelines, our assessment procedures. They played us perfectly. And now? Now those methods get revised. New protocols get implemented. The holes in our security get patched. He looked at her. And operators like us remember what it feels like to walk into a trap, so we're more careful next time. Mara absorbed that. Do you think they targeted you specifically? Or was it just bad luck? I think we were convenient. The right team in the right place at the right time for someone to score a propaganda victory by killing American operators. If it hadn't been us, it would have been someone else. That doesn't make it better. No, but it means we weren't singled out, just unlucky. Until I decided to break protocol and save your asses. Best bad luck I ever had. Mara laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite acknowledgement she usually offered. It sounded rusty, like machinery that hadn't been used in too long, but genuine. You know what the strangest part is? She said. For 3 years I told myself I was doing important work. Watching, reporting, providing intelligence that kept people safe. I believed it mattered. It did matter. But it didn't feel like it mattered. I was alone on a mountain sending reports into the void and trusting that someone somewhere was using that information to make good decisions. I never saw the results. Never knew if anything I did actually helped anyone. And now? Now I've seen it. I pulled 12 triggers and saved 12 lives. I know exactly what I accomplished because I was there. I saw your faces, heard your voices, watched you survive because I made that choice. She shook her head slowly. I can't go back to the shadows after that. Can't go back to being invisible and pretending that's enough. You don't have to. You're part of something visible now. Something real. Yeah, I am. They sat until full dark. 2 operators processing trauma in the quiet way that military professionals did. Not through therapy speak or emotional processing, but through honest conversation and mutual understanding. Eventually Mara stood, stretched, and offered Rourke a hand up. Thank you, she said. For this. For letting me talk without trying to fix me. You're not broken, you're just adjusting, I know, but it helps to hear it. They walked back toward the barracks together. The base settling into its nighttime rhythm of reduced activity and heightened security. Tomorrow they'd return to training. Next week they'd be back on the rotation. The machinery of military life would grind forward regardless of what had happened on that mountain. But something had changed, something permanent and important. Mara had found her way back from the shadows. Rourke had gained a teammate whose skills and courage were matched only by her absolute commitment to protecting the people she cared about. The team had been forged in fire and come out stronger. The next morning, Rourke assembled his team in the briefing room, all 13 operators, 12 who'd survived the mountain and 1 who'd saved them. They looked better than they had 4 days ago. The worst injuries were healing. The exhaustion was fading. They were ready to move forward. All right, Rourke said, standing at the front of the room. Before we get back to normal operations, I need to say something. What happened last week was a failure at every level except ours. Bad intelligence, compromised security, support that didn't materialize when we needed it. We were set up and nearly killed because people we trusted to do their jobs didn't. The team listened in silence. But we survived. Not because we were lucky, not because the enemy made mistakes. We survived because we're professionals who know how to adapt when everything goes wrong. We survived because when our comms went down and our support evaporated, we fell back on training and teamwork and sheer stubborn refusal to die. He looked at Mara. And we survived because one operator decided that protocol mattered less than lives. Sergeant Voss broke every rule she had to pull us out of that kill box. She sacrificed her career, her cover, and her safety to save people she'd never met. That's not just courage. That's the kind of character this team is built on. Rourke turned back to the full team. So moving forward, we remember what we learned. We trust our instincts. We question bad intel. We look out for each other. And we never forget that sometimes the most important decision is the one that goes against protocol because it's right. He paused. Welcome to the team, Mara. You've already proven you belong here. Now we get to prove we're worthy of having you. The team stood as one, a gesture of respect and acceptance that needed no words. Mara stood with them, no longer apart from, but part of. No longer watching from a distance, but standing shoulder to shoulder with operators who'd become family in the space of one impossible week. Chen spoke up from the back of the room. So when do we get to see her shoot again? Because I've been telling everyone about those helicopter kills and nobody believes me. Tomorrow, Rourke said. Range time. Mara can demonstrate proper long-range shooting technique while the rest of you try not to look incompetent by comparison. I'm definitely going to look incompetent, Ortiz said cheerfully. But I'm okay with that if it means I learn something. The meeting dissolved into the casual chatter of a team comfortable with each other. Mara found herself in the center of conversations instead of on the outside, found herself laughing at jokes and contributing to planning and feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. Later that day, she stood on the range with her rifle, not the one she'd used on the mountain, which had been confiscated for analysis, but a similar platform that felt right in her hands. The team gathered to watch, genuinely curious about what she could do when not fighting for survival. Rourke set up targets at increasing distances, 500 meters, 800, 1,000, distances where wind, elevation, and basic physics turned shooting into mathematics and art combined. Mara settled into position, felt the familiar weight of the rifle, controlled her breathing, and found the calm center that had sustained her through 3 years of isolation and 1 week of chaos. She fired. The first target went down, then the second, then the third, each shot precise, economical, perfect. Not showing off, just demonstrating the skill that had been honed through thousands of hours alone on mountainsides, with nothing but time and dedication. When she finished, the range was silent. Then Kim started clapping. The others joined in, this time not just in acknowledgement of what Mara had done on the mountain, but in recognition of what she brought to the team, a level of expertise that would make them all better, a commitment to excellence that matched their own, a presence that had been missing and was now complete. Mara stood, safed her rifle, and turned to face them with a smile that reached her eyes. Your turn, she said to Chen. Let's see what you've got. The afternoon passed in training and laughter and the kind of comfortable camaraderie that defined the best teams. They pushed each other, learned from each other, built the bonds that would matter when the next mission went sideways, and they needed to trust each other with their lives. As the sun set on another day, Rourke watched his team pack up their gear and head back to the barracks. They moved like a single organism, connected, coordinated, complete. 13 instead of 12. Better than they'd been before the mountain. Mara stayed behind, helping police the brass and secure the weapons. When they were alone, she looked at Rourke with an expression that carried gratitude and relief and something that might have been peace. I never thought I'd find this again, she said quietly. After Daniel died, after I went into the shadows, I convinced myself that solitude was strength, that needing people was weakness, that I was better off alone where I couldn't fail anyone or watch anyone fail. And now? Now I know I was wrong. Strength isn't isolation, it's connection. It's having people who'll climb a mountain under fire to reach you. It's being part of something bigger than yourself. Welcome home, Mara. Yeah, home. They walked back together as darkness settled over the base and stars emerged in the clear sky above. Somewhere out there, enemies were planning. Threats were developing. Future missions would go wrong in new and terrible ways. But tonight, on this base, one team was whole. One operator had found her way back from the shadows. One captain had proven that loyalty and courage mattered more than protocol and convenience. The mountain had tested them. They'd survived. And in surviving, they'd found something worth fighting for: each other. The weeks that followed fell into rhythm. Training missions, real operations. The endless cycle of preparation and execution that defined military life. Mara integrated into the team with surprising speed, her skills complementing theirs, her presence filling gaps they hadn't known existed. She taught them advanced observation techniques. They taught her room clearing and close-quarters combat. She showed them patience and precision. They showed her aggression and adaptability. Together, they became something more than the sum of their parts. 3 months after the mountain, Rourke sat in another briefing room, receiving another mission assignment. This time he read the intelligence with skeptical eyes. This time he asked hard questions. This time he made sure the support was real before committing his team. The lessons had been learned. That evening, he found Mara on the same bench where they'd talked months ago. She was watching the sunset again, but this time her expression was peaceful rather than haunted. "You doing okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Yeah, I really am." She smiled. "I got a message today from Director Vance. The investigation's closed. Everyone involved in the intelligence compromise has been dealt with. The security holes have been patched. It's over." "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, grateful, ready to move forward." She paused. She also said something interesting. Said the program I was part of is being restructured. Less isolation. More integration with operational teams. They're calling it lessons learned from my case. Meaning you changed how they do business. Meaning I broke enough rules that they had to acknowledge maybe the rules needed breaking. Mara looked at him. Daniel didn't die for nothing. The changes they're making, they would have saved him. They'll save others. That's good. Yeah, it is. They sat in comfortable silence while the sun painted the sky in colors that no longer reminded Mara of muzzle flashes, but simply looked beautiful. "You know what I realized?" she said after a while. "On that mountain, when I fired that first shot, I thought I was ending something. My career, my mission, everything I'd built. But I was actually beginning something. Something better." "What's that?" "Living. Really living. Not just surviving in the shadows, but being part of something real. Having people who matter, mattering to people." She turned to look at him. "You gave me that. You and the team. You reminded me what it feels like to be human instead of just an asset. You did that yourself. We just didn't let you run away from it. Thank you for that, for not letting me run." Rourke stood, offered her a hand up. "Come on, team dinner in 30 minutes. Chen's cooking, which means it'll be either surprisingly good or catastrophically bad. Either way, it'll be entertaining." Mara took his hand and stood, ready to face another evening with the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back. Ready to be part of instead of apart from. Ready to live forward instead of hiding in the past. As they walked back toward the barracks, Rourke thought about the journey that had brought them here. The trap, the mountain, the impossible rescue, the bureaucratic battles, the integration and healing and growth. It hadn't been clean, it hadn't been easy, it had nearly destroyed them all. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd emerged stronger, wiser, more complete. Sometimes the most powerful shot isn't the one that ends a threat. Sometimes it's the one that saves a life and changes everything that comes after. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to honor what the rules were meant to protect. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step out of the shadows and into the light, trusting that the people you find there will catch you when you fall and help you remember what it means to truly live. Mara had taken that step, had pulled that trigger, had chosen life over isolation and courage over protocol. She'd found her way home. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in following orders. It's in choosing what's right when the two conflict, and trusting that the people worth fighting for will fight for you in return.